Chapter 11:24. Old Chi-Si, who was sitting across from Dami Hayashi, narrowed her enchanting peach blossom eyes and looked at her indifferently. Her slender fingers gently tapped on the table. "Are you jealous of my beauty? Are you saying that I'm old?" Chi-Si said. After she finished speaking, her eyes turned. There was a scarlet luster on her eyelids, making her gaze seem a bit lazy. Chi-Si saw Bufang. This was the first time she saw Bufang. When Bufang met the female King Biluo in the palace, Chi-Si was not there. "This is the man who threatened to go to God Vanishing Mountain and said that he would make an imperial feast to conquer the queen?" Chi-Si said softly. Her voice had a kind of charm that belonged to a mature woman. When Chi-Si's words came out, the entire audience went into an uproar. Many people's gazes fell on Bufang, as if they were looking at someone who overestimated himself. "Chi-Si, you haven't answered my question yet." Dami Hayashi grabbed the wine jar and shook it impatiently. Chi-Si propped up her white chin with one hand and looked at Dami Hayashi. "Do you think I'm a fool? If you have the ability, buy it yourself. 100,000 nether crystals. As a great general, you should be able to afford it," Chi-Si said. Dami Hayashi rolled her eyes. "If you don't want to lend it, then don't lend it. Why are you dawdling? Do you think I don't know that you're a miser?" Then, Dami Hayashi opened her eyes and her gaze fell on Chef Jingyuan. Jingyuan was slightly stunned. She did not seem to understand why Dami Hayashi was looking at her. At this moment, her attention was on the green jade jar in Bufang's hand. The wine fragrance that filled the air wrapped around her nose, causing her expression to become a little serious. "Acaron grass. Flower of helplessness. This jar of wine, it actually uses such rare ingredients," Jingyuan whispered. Bufang didn't expect that this woman would be able to identify the main ingredients of the wine just by smelling it. "Chef Jingyuan, don't look at that wine first. Look at your own wine." Dami Hayashi lifted the wine jar and shook it in front of Jingyuan, attracting Jingyuan's attention. When Jingyuan saw this, her gaze instantly froze. "What happened? Chef, this man said your wine is fake. You brewed 30% of it, and the remaining 70% was brewed by your apprentice chef," Dami Hayashi said, looking at Chef Jingyuan as if there was a sharp sword light bursting out from her eyes. Chi-Si held her knife and fork, and had already begun to elegantly cut the papillion steak. The papillion steak emitted a rich fragrance, and the soup was even more fragrant. He cut off a piece of meat. The gravy was thick, and the outer layer of the meat was dark brown. In the middle, there was a hint of pinkness. Chi-Si forked the meat with satisfaction and sent it into her mouth. Her red lips bit down, and the gravy seeped out, overflowing from the gap between her lips. Chi-Si gently gasped, stuck out her tongue, and licked the corner of her mouth. It had to be said that Chi-Si's eating posture was very tempting. However, most people didn't notice, because everyone was attracted by the taste of the vermilion fruit wine papillion steak. Bufang glanced at it and felt a chill in his heart at the control of the papillion steak's heat. It was almost perfect. The perfect control of the heat allowed the fragrance of the papillion steak to be released to the maximum. Narrowing his eyes, Bufang unexpectedly looked at Chef Jingyuan, who was a little embarrassed by Dami Hayashi's questions. She was different from the strong chef he had imagined. The chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion, who had been in charge of the imperial feast many times, seemed to be an introverted little girl. Being questioned by Dami Hayashi, her forehead was sweating. "Great General Lin, don't worry. Let me taste this wine. If it's really as you said, I will compensate you." Chef Jingyuan finally interrupted Dami Hayashi's endless talk and solemnly said. Bufang looked at Jingyuan's appearance and also frowned. It seemed that Chef Jingyuan should not be clear about this matter. It was most likely that all of this was done by the owner of Spring Breeze Pavilion. The owner of Spring Breeze Pavilion was a businessman. Since he was a businessman, he naturally had the utilitarianism of a businessman. Faking was normal. Dami Hayashi also did not speak. She looked at Chef Jing Yuan, pouring a glass of wine into her mouth. Chef Jing Yuan's brows furrowed in an instant. There was no doubt that as a brewer, she only needed to taste it to know the trick. "It's my negligence," Chef Jing Yuan sighed. She was not stupid. She understood the whole story in an instant. When Dami Hayashi saw Chef Jing Yuan's expression, she suddenly froze. Was it really true? The wine she was happily drinking turned out to be fake wine? She looked at Bufang, somewhat in disbelief. She did not expect Bufang to taste it with just a sip. "You!" Dami Hayashi wanted to say something, but she could not say it. "Now you know you're stupid. Don't forget the treat," Bufang said. "Can I have a glass of this wine?" Chef Jing Yuan suddenly looked at Bufang and asked nervously. Facing a man in person, she was really a little nervous. Now that Bufang saw Chef Jing Yuan, he was not in a hurry. He pulled out a chair and sat down, sitting opposite Qi-Si. Qi-Si, who was elegantly eating her food, unexpectedly raised her eyebrows and looked at Bufang. "I made a bet with your queen. She said that as long as I can conquer her with the imperial feast, she will take me to God Vanishing Mountain. I have something important to do there, so I want to know how to get the qualification to cook the imperial feast." Bufang looked at Chef Jing Yuan and said. He took out a blue and white porcelain cup, poured a glass of wine, and flicked his finger. It floated toward Chef Jing Yuan. Chef Jing Yuan, who was wearing a neat chef robe, took a step back, her face solemn. She took the acheron of helplessness wine that Bufang handed over, held the cup with both hands, and put it into her mouth. As the wine entered her throat, her face became even more solemn. She did not immediately answer Bufang's words, but was silent for a long time, as if she was recalling the taste of the wine. After a long time, her eyes trembled violently, and she let out a breath. "Good wine. It's really good wine." Chef Jing Yuan sighed. Her eyes were a little complicated as she looked at Bufang. "If you want to get the qualification to cook for the imperial feast, it's very simple. It's a cooking competition. You just have to beat me. Because before this, Goddess City has already carried out the selection competition for the imperial feast chefs, and I won. So if you want to get the qualification, you have to beat me. Only by beating me will you be qualified. Moreover, even if you beat me, it can only be said that you have obtained the qualification to cook with me for Her Majesty. Moreover, each of your dishes must go through my inspection to prevent you from tampering with the dishes." Jing Yuan did not hide anything, revealing everything. This made Bufang slightly stunned. He thought that the chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion would not be willing to tell him how to get the qualification to cook for the imperial feast because of her status. He did not think that the other party would be so honest. However, thinking of the other party's previous appearance when asked by Dami Hayashi, Bufang also understood. This was a girl without any scheming or shrewdness. While eating, Qi-Si looked at the conversation between Chef Jing Yuan and Bufang with great interest. A cooking competition? Interesting. Chef Jing Yuan was the strongest chef in Goddess City. Why did this man dare to compete with Jing Yuan in cooking? Moreover, this man wanted to go to God Vanishing Mountain. That was a forbidden place in hell, and it was difficult for people to come out alive. Was this man crazy? "Here's your wine glass." Chef Jing Yuan finished her wine and handed the glass back with both hands. After Bufang took it, he looked at her. "A cooking competition?" "Yes. When can we start?" Jing Yuan was stunned. Was this man really going to compete with her in cooking? However, the aftertaste of the wine in her mouth made Chef Jing Yuan stunned. "Tomorrow. Your wine made me believe in your cooking, so I have to prepare seriously." Chef Jing Yuan was very serious. Bufang nodded. "Tomorrow then. Tomorrow I will come to Spring Breeze Pavilion again. At that time, it will be the time for you and me to compete in cooking." Dami Hayashi was sandwiched between the two, listening to their conversation. She couldn't help but be a little confused. Finally, she waved her hand. That's settled then. Since the general is free tomorrow, I'll be the witness of your cooking competition, Dami Hayashi said excitedly. Well, this general is also free. Picking up the fork and putting a piece of dragon steak into her mouth, Chi-Si said elegantly. As soon as her voice fell, a hissing sound rang out. What competition? I don't agree. In the distance, an old woman, with her hands behind her back, slowly walked over. Bufang's gaze couldn't help but turn and fall on the person. Cooking competition? Can anyone compete with the chefs of my Spring Wind Pavilion in terms of cooking skills? What do you think I, the chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion, am? The old woman said angrily, and in an instant, she appeared in front of Bufang and the others. Chef Jing Yuan suddenly felt a little awkward. Madame Jean. Chef Jing Yuan blushed, took a step back, and said, You little girl. Have you learned to make decisions without authorization? The old woman glanced at Chef Jing Yuan and snorted. Yo, Madame Jean is so powerful. Chi-Si played with the knife and fork in her hand, looking at the old woman with a slightly cold gaze. The old woman looked at Chi-Si with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. General Chi-Si, the dishes are still to your taste. Jing Yuan is not sensible. Why don't you help Madame control her? After the old woman finished speaking, her eyes turned and fell on Bufang. Man? Do you think that as a man, you can compete with the chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion at will? You want to get the qualification to cook for the imperial feast. Who do you think you are? The old woman opened her mouth and scolded Bufang. This old woman was the owner of Spring Breeze Pavilion. In her opinion, it was a thankless act for Jing Yuan to compete with this man. Madam, if his cooking can really beat me, the imperial feast naturally needs to be cooked by a better chef. Jing Yuan said with a frown. Beat you? Win my ass. The qualification to cook for the imperial feast is so precious. How can it be given up so easily? The old woman glared at Chef Jing Yuan. Jing Yuan was shocked, and the latter was speechless. She took a step back, and her eyes suddenly became red. Dami Hayashi was suddenly unhappy. You old woman, did you ask someone to make the fake wine? I risked my life to earn 9,000 nether crystals just for you to fool me with this fake wine? Dami Hayashi clenched her teeth. The old woman glanced at Dami Hayashi and said, Did you drink it? It's all because of this man. Do you believe whatever this man says? Dami Hayashi suddenly became angry. I still suspect that this wine was made by this man. I suspect that General Lin colluded with this man to frame my Spring Breeze Pavilion. The old woman opened her mouth and shouted. Jing Yuan's face suddenly became anxious. This Madame Jean was really a scoundrel. Dami Hayashi was so angry that the top of her head was about to emit smoke. Chi-Si, on the other hand, threw down her knife and fork. She also lost her appetite and just coldly looked at Madame Jean with her hands crossed. Bufang looked at all this coldly. The other party did not want him to have a chef's challenge with Jing Yuan because of Jing Yuan's reputation as a chef. If he lost, the business of Spring Breeze Pavilion would definitely be greatly affected. Moreover, Jing Yuan's dishes had always been imperial feast dishes. This was a publicity stunt. If he lost the cooking competition and lost the qualification to cook for the imperial feast, then the publicity stunt would be gone. With such a high price, how could anyone buy it? Therefore, it was absolutely impossible for the old woman to agree to Jing Yuan's request for a chef's challenge. The old woman's angry eyes turned and fell on Bufang. Don't even think about the chef's challenge. Don't even think about getting the qualification to cook for the imperial feast. This is the honor that belongs to the chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion. You are an outsider. What right do you have to snatch this qualification? Get lost. Get lost, or I will ask the guards to kick you out. The old woman's voice became more and more severe, and her voice became louder and louder, echoing throughout the entire Spring Breeze Pavilion. In the last sentence, she stretched out her finger and pointed at Bufang's nose, her finger trembling. The audience was silent. Chi-Si and Dami Hayashi both coldly snorted with an ugly expression. Jing Yuan was already anxious to the point of crying. Bufang looked at the old woman indifferently. Then, he slowly stood up. He put away the green jade jar. He took off the black robe on his body, revealing the red and white vermilion robe. He slowly let out a breath. Then, his mind moved. Streaks of golden light shot out. 1, 2, 3, 7 golden explosive meatballs floated around his body, emitting a dazzling golden light. A guy who takes advantage of his seniority. Who do you think you are, asking me to get lost? Bufang raised 2 fingers and pinched an explosive pissing meatball. His gaze was extremely cold as he said. Chapter 11:25. Bufang's voice was like thunder, lingering in the entire Spring Breeze Pavilion, deafening. Everyone's eyes widened as they looked at Bufang, who had suddenly become domineering. They all sucked in a breath of cold air. This man was actually so domineering. Did he know who he was talking to? That was the owner of Spring Breeze Pavilion, the richest person in the entire Goddess City. Even the high-ranking officials of Goddess City did not dare to offend Madame Jean. However, Bufang actually opened his mouth and scolded her without giving her the slightest face. Chi-Si was stunned. Her eyes slightly narrowed as she looked at Bufang with interest. Dami Hayashi was also slightly stunned. Obviously, she did not expect that Bufang would actually say such a thing. Madame Jean was even more angered by Bufang's words, and her whole body trembled. How many years had it been? In Goddess City, how many years had it been since someone dared to speak to her like this? Ever since she cultivated one chef after another in Spring Breeze Pavilion, ever since Spring Breeze Pavilion took over the entire Goddess City Imperial Feast's cooking qualifications, in Goddess City, other than the Queen and the Priestess, who was she, Madame Jean, afraid of? Which high-ranking official dared to not give her face? In front of her, a man from the outside world actually dared to point fingers at her and scold her loudly. Simply audacious to the extreme. Good, good, good. You really have the guts. You even dare to scold me, Madame Jean. Madame Jean's face became extremely ugly. Anger surged in her eyes, and a murderous intent swept through. Only you can scold people, but I am not allowed to talk back? To take advantage of your seniority to act like this, you're really shameless. Bufang said lightly, the corners of his mouth twitching. Humph. You still dare to talk back. Shut up. Buzz, Madame Jean suddenly shouted, and a golden crutch appeared in her hand. She slammed the crutch on the ground, and a terrifying shockwave instantly spread out. In the next moment, figures burst out from every corner of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. 4 figures instantly appeared above the Spring Breeze Pavilion. A powerful aura spread out from the 4 of them. An invisible pressure shrouded the area, causing the expressions of everyone in the Spring Breeze Pavilion to change. Chef Jing Yuan's face suddenly turned pale. It seemed that Madame Jean was really angry. She even called out the 4 great divine guards of Spring Breeze Pavilion. The cultivation of these 4 great divine guards was not ordinary. Each of them was an 8-star true immortal realm expert and had mastered an ancient array. With the 4 of them working together, coupled with the power of the array, even Chi-Si and Dami Hayashi would be extremely afraid. This male chef might not be able to escape this time. Although this man had a good relationship with General Dami Hayashi, would Dami Hayashi go against the 4 great divine guards of Spring Breeze Pavilion for a man? Because it was very easy to be seriously injured. This price. General Dami Hayashi could not afford it. Sure enough, as soon as the 4 great divine guards appeared, the entire Spring Breeze Pavilion became silent. No one dared to speak, not even daring to breathe. They all stared at Madame Jean, who was holding the golden crutch. For a moment their minds were shaken. It was as if there was a sonorous sound. The 4 great divine guards floated from every corner of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. The pressure from their bodies seemed to form a unique force field, and in an instant it enveloped Bufang. Dami Hayashi, who was closest to Bufang, suddenly changed her expression and became very ugly. Chi-Si also became a lot more serious. Even she did not dare to underestimate the 4 great divine guards. Madame Jean leaned on the golden crutch and stared coldly at Bufang. There was a surging killing intent in her eyes. Man, if you beg this old woman for mercy now, I can still spare your dog life. Otherwise, offending me, Madame Jean, and causing trouble in Spring Breeze Pavilion, is enough for you to be consigned to eternal damnation. Although Madame Jean was old, her voice was sonorous and full of vigor. Every word was like the evening drum and morning bell, pounding on people's hearts. For a moment, her power was unparalleled. Spring Breeze Pavilion was the noblest restaurant in Goddess City, and Madame Jean was the richest person in Goddess City. Sure enough, it was not without reason. This man was dead for sure. Suddenly Chi-Si froze. Because she was sitting opposite Bufang, she could clearly see Bufang's face and expression. That calm and expressionless face caused her to involuntarily reveal a strange expression. 7 beef meatballs floated around Bufang's body. The golden beef meatballs exuded heat and fragrance, which was quite magical. Many people knew about the uproar caused by the explosion of the beef meatballs. Although the power was not bad, they were still not optimistic. That kind of power might be enough to deal with ordinary true Immortal Realm experts, but against 4 8-star true Immortal Realm experts combined with an ancient array, it was not enough. Of course, this was just the opinion of the crowd. What Bufang was thinking, they naturally did not know. Dami Hayashi was a little afraid. She glanced at Bufang. She did not think that things would become so big. Beg for mercy. Old thing, I'm giving you face, right? Do you really want me to blow up Spring Breeze Pavilion? Bufang said lightly. His mind moved. Suddenly, an array emerged under his feet. Xiaobai and Xiaopi emerged from the array, appearing behind Bufang. A puppet? This is what you're relying on? Seeing Xiaobai and Xiaopi, Madame Jean sneered. In her eyes, this man had exhausted all his trick. This Earth Immortal Puppet's aura was only at the level of 4 or 5-star true Immortal Realm. Any divine guard could crush it with one hand. It was not something that Bufang could rely on. If he really wanted to rely on someone, then General Dami Hayashi might make him a little afraid. After all, General Dami Hayashi was on Bufang's side from the beginning. Madame Jean was not easy to deal with a general. Goddess City had 5 great generals, each of whom was at the peak of true Immortal Realm. They were in charge of their respective armies. The Green Dragon Army, the Red Dragon Army, the Black Dragon Army, the Beast Army, and the Guard Army. None of the armies could be underestimated. But now, it seemed that Dami Hayashi did not intend to help Bufang. In this way, killing Bufang would be a piece of cake. A reckless man actually wanted to fight with Jing Yuan for the right to cook the imperial feast. Who did he think he was? Boom! A loud sound. The 4 divine guards landed beside Bufang. Their aura condensed, as if they had turned into waves. They connected together and rushed towards Bufang. Bufang's eyes narrowed and he frowned. Madame Jean leaned on her golden crutch and took a step back, out of the encirclement of the 4 divine guards. Only Bufang and Dami Hayashi were left in the encirclement. Jing Yuan opened her mouth and wanted to say something. But Madame Jean turned her head and glared at her. Shut up. Don't talk. I'll teach you a lesson later. Jing Yuan suddenly became dejected and did not say anything. Madame Jean grabbed her golden crutch, raised it, and pointed it directly at Bufang. 4 divine guards. Take this man down. If he resists, I don't care if he's dead or alive. He came to my Spring Breeze Pavilion to make trouble, and spoke rudely to me, Madame Jean. This is his fate. The Chinese voice was sonorous, and it went straight for Bufang. These 4 divine guards wore golden armor, had long golden hair, and skin whiter than snow. Each of them was extremely beautiful and had a moving face. The eyes of these 4 divine guards were cold and ruthless. There seemed to be no other emotions except for killing. Bufang frowned. One of the divine guards moved, and the pressure of an 8-star true immortal realm burst out. It directly pressed towards Bufang. Madame Jean sneered in the distance. Qi-Si's face froze. The surrounding people held their breaths as they watched. Chef Jing Yuan, on the other hand, was dejected. Boom! Suddenly, Dami Hayashi made a move. Her palm blasted out and blocked in front of the divine guard. Waves of air swirled, and with one move, the divine guard was pushed back. Great General Lin, are you going to become enemies with my Spring Breeze Pavilion for a man? If so, this old lady will definitely report this to His Majesty. I just don't know if Great General Lin can bear the responsibility. Madame Jean looked at Dami Hayashi and sneered. Dami Hayashi's body stiffened. This old lady was the richest person in Goddess City. If she really spoke nonsense in front of His Majesty, she, Dami Hayashi, might really be punished. She might even be banned from leading the Green Dragon Army. Despicable old lady. Dami Hayashi gritted her teeth, and her wheat-colored face almost turned red because of anger. She had to choose between the Green Dragon Army and a man. Dami Hayashi naturally chose the Green Dragon Army. That was her everything. So, Dami Hayashi retreated. Man, this general can't help you. Take care of yourself. If you can escape, escape quickly. Dami Hayashi glanced at Bufang, and her eyes revealed a hint of emotion. Escape? Madame Jean sneered. Break his legs first. Bufang's face was extremely calm. He nodded at Dami Hayashi. Then, he looked at the divine guard. In the next moment, he grabbed an explosive meatball and gently bit into it. Suddenly, a hole appeared in the meatball. Sizzle, thick steam burst out from the meatball, and there was also a fragrance that soared to the sky. Xiaopi, Bufang said. Suddenly, a golden stream of light flashed. With an invisible roar, the golden light suddenly became bigger. Xiaopi's figure turned into a giant beast. Bufang leaped up, landing on Xiaopi's back. He flicked his finger. An bursting pissing meatball sizzled with hot steam as it spun towards the divine guard who had attacked. Xiaopi's golden stream of light flashed, shooting up to the sky, heading toward the roof of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Catch him. Break his legs. Madame Jean hit the ground with her golden walking stick. Boom. Boom. The 4 divine guards rushed up at the same time. Everyone was watching this farce. Suddenly, a divine guard raised his hand, slapping the meatball that was dashing toward him. His face suddenly froze. Rumble! An explosion suddenly rang out. This explosion made everyone suck in a breath of cold air. They couldn't believe it, because the power of this explosion seemed to be stronger than before. Rumble! The divine guard who caught the meatball with her bare hands suddenly howled. Her beautiful face was full of pain. One of her arms was blown off, and her body was in a mess. A whistling sound. It fell from the sky and smashed into the floor, shattering the floor. Madame Jean was shocked, taking a step back. In front of her, the ground was blown into a deep pit. An explosive meatball, and a divine guard was seriously injured. Everyone was dumbfounded. They sucked in a breath of cold air. It turned out that the power of the explosive meatball was not its full power. Bufang had actually held back. The remaining 3 divine guards looked at each other, seeing the fear in each other's eyes. Above the dome, Bufang stepped on the golden shrimp. He crossed his arms in front of his chest. Around him, the golden meatballs were floating. Bufang's eyes looked at Madame Jean. Then, he raised his hand, bit off another meatball, and flicked it. Swish! The explosive meatball shot out. The 3 divine guards did not dare to stop it. They had seen the power of the explosion. The first divine guard's arm was blown off. It was enough to show the power of the explosive meatball. Bufang had used the explosive meatball to blow up a peak true immortal realm expert of the Nether prison. Naturally, they knew this power. These so-called 3 divine guards were just 8-star true immortal realm expert. If they dared to catch the meatball with their bare hands, they would be blown into pieces. Bufang's face was cold. That divine guard dodged the meatball. The meatball fell. This time, Bufang did not control the power, so the meatball landed on the wall of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. With a loud boom, the entire Spring Breeze Pavilion shook. A big hole was blasted out of the wall. Broken bricks and stones kept falling down. Damn it! Block that exploding meatball for me. Don't destroy the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Use the array, use the ancient array. Granny Jean was flustered and exasperated. Seeing the big hole in the wall of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, she shivered in pain. Boom! The divine guard with a broken arm rushed up, his pale face showing a cold expression. Divine light appeared on the bodies of the 4 divine guards, and a small array appeared between their eyebrows. Their auras suddenly soared. The power of the 4 divine guards continued to rise. Bufang's eyes narrowed. In the next instant, the remaining 5 explosive meatballs shot out. A golden stream of light whistled across the sky, smashing toward the 4 divine guards. Boom! An extremely bright light appeared in the sky. That was caused by the explosion. Waves of air blasted out, and the Spring Breeze Pavilion seemed to be shaking. The walls were covered with dense cracks. It seemed like it would collapse at any time. The light dissipated and the smoke disappeared. Granny Jean was so angry that her whole body was going crazy. In the sky, the scene was quite miserable. Of course, it was the 4 divine guards who were in a miserable state. They had completely turned into blood men. The superimposed power of the 5 explosive meatballs was not as simple as 1+1 superposition. The power of the attack increased exponentially. The bodies of the 4 divine guards were broken, dripping with blood. The golden armor on their bodies was shattered, turning into fine pieces, constantly falling. His appearance caused everyone to suck in a breath of cold air. They were extremely terrified. Dami Hayashi was stunned, and so was Chi-Si. Everyone was horrified. This man could explode a good meatball. Buzz, a faint fluctuation of the array filled the air. Bufang furrowed his brows. The 4 divine guards were indeed extraordinary, or that array was not ordinary. Even this couldn't kill them, he exhaled. Bufang's mind flickered. In the next moment, a dried pot made of iron lotus flowers appeared in his hand. The perishing pot, emitting a gloomy luster, floated in Bufang's hand. The white flame burned quietly below, twisting the void. Chapter 11:26. A fragrant aroma instantly filled the air, lingering in the air and drilling into everyone's mouth and nose. Bufang stood on the golden shrimp, hovering above the ceiling of the Spring Breeze Pavilion with a dish in his hand. It was a steaming hot dish with a lingering aroma. The aroma of the dish was extremely rich, like a blooming flower. At first glance, people couldn't help but sink into it. It seemed to have a magical power that could completely attract people. The silver iron lotus flower and the white flame were overflowing with an oily luster. The perishing pot. It had appeared once again. Bufang held the perishing pot in his hand. His face couldn't help but turn serious. The power of the perishing pot was extremely terrifying, and the fluctuations it contained made people's hearts palpitate. Although the aroma was overwhelming, it also contained a great danger. Ordinary people didn't dare to touch it. The power formed by the gourmet array and the will of the great path was enough to make people's hearts tremble. Holding the perishing pot in his hand, Bufang could also feel the mental force in his spirit sea rapidly flowing away. It was constantly being devoured by the perishing pot at a very fast speed. To maintain the balance between the gourmet array and the will of the great path in the perishing pot, the mental force consumed was enormous. In order to obtain enough power, one must pay a corresponding price. Everyone in the Spring Breeze Pavilion was shocked. They never thought that things would turn out this way. That man had actually beaten the 4 divine guards into such a sorry state. How much power did he have to inflict such serious injuries on them? Even General Dami Hayashi or General Chi would find it difficult to do so. After all, the array used by the 4 divine guards was an ancient array that Madame Jean had spent a lot of money to obtain. Its power was extremely terrifying, and it had been verified countless times. The power of that array had even been recognized by the Empress. However, looking at the 4 divine guards who were bleeding profusely, everyone's mouths were dry and their tongues were dry. It was too terrifying. Dami Hayashi's heart trembled. She was incomparably shocked. Chi-Si's eyes also shrank. For the first time, she looked at Bufang seriously. Although Bufang did not rely on his own strength, the fact that he was able to injure the 4 divine guards with meatballs showed that his strength was not to be underestimated. That beef meatball. Did he make it himself? Exploding beef balls? Jing Yuan was already in a daze. She frowned and fell into deep thought. As a chef, the first thing she thought about was food. Was the explosive pissing meatball a delicacy? It must be. That fragrance was very fragrant, however. How could delicacies explode? This was illogical. Moreover, the dried pot in Bufang's hand was emitting an even thicker fragrance. However, it cast a shadow over everyone's heart. Everyone looked at the dried pot in his hand and felt their hearts tremble, as if they were being stared at by the god of death. It was as if the dried pot represented death, incomparably terrifying. Rumble! One of the walls of the Spring Breeze Pavilion collapsed. Rubble fell from the tall building and smashed into the streets of Goddess City, causing the ground to collapse. Many women on the street screamed and ran in all directions. They did not expect that the walls of the Spring Breeze Pavilion would collapse. Moreover, what was even more frightening was that everyone outside the Spring Breeze Pavilion looked at the densely cracked and crumbling Spring Breeze Pavilion building, feeling a burst of fear. What happened in the Spring Breeze Pavilion? Why did the Spring Breeze Pavilion seem to be destroyed? Granny Jean was so angry that she went crazy. Her face was covered in grime from being smashed by a foreign man with meatballs. This made Granny Jean feel a burst of anger. Kill him for me. Break his limbs. Madame Jean roared and slammed her golden crutch on the ground. Buzz waves of fluctuations spread out. In the next instant, the guards of the Spring Breeze Pavilion soared into the sky. Although they were not as strong as the 4 divine guards, each of them had reached the 3-star true immortal realm. They were the guards that Madame Jean had spent a lot of money to organize. It had always been a secret organization that she did not dare to expose. Now, because of Bufang, she had to send them out. He doesn't have that strange meatball anymore. He has no more tricks. All of you, take him down. Madame Jean waved her golden crutch crazily and roared continuously. Yes! The guards roared. In the next instant, a clanging sound rang out. Long swords were unsheathed, and sword light filled the air. Long blades were waved, and blade light shot out in all directions. Dozens of true immortal realm guards soared into the sky like a flood, heading straight for Bufang. The 4 divine guards had a strong recovery ability, so they quickly recovered. At this moment, the 4 divine guards looked at Bufang with murderous eyes. They almost suffered a loss in the hands of a man and were almost killed by the meatball. It was simply unforgivable. Even if Madame Jean did not say it, they would not forgive Bufang. Rip! The void shattered. The 4 divine guards attacked at the same time. Plus, the guards were like a flood. This power was extremely terrifying. The entire Spring Breeze Pavilion was silent. Everyone raised their heads, looking at the spectacular scene on the roof. For a moment they were speechless. Dami Hayashi did not know what to say. Without the meatball, could Bufang still fight? However, the dish in his hand seemed to be quite extraordinary. I hope that Bufang still has some tricks up his sleeves. Blow up this old woman for me. Just looking at her makes me annoyed. Dami Hayashi muttered. Chi-Si's red robe fluttered, and her eyes were extremely solemn. She felt that something terrible was about to happen. Boom, boom, boom. Waves of nether energy soared into the sky. The 4 divine guards, along with many other guards, completely surrounded Bufang. The ceiling was densely packed with people. Outside Spring Breeze Pavilion, many people had gathered. After all, Spring Breeze Pavilion was the largest restaurant in Goddess City, so it naturally attracted a lot of people's attention. Now that something had happened, many people came to join in the fun. Bufang exhaled, glancing around indifferently. His spirit sea was constantly churning, and his mental force seemed to be about to be sucked dry. He felt a slight tingling pain. Using this perishing pot was also a big burden for him. His current strength was still a little weak. However, he looked around at the people surrounding him, as well as the old lady Jean who was sneering at him. Bufang's face gradually became cold. This old woman was really not afraid of death. Since she wanted to cause trouble, let's do it. The bursting beef meatball could not frighten this old woman, so let her have a taste of the power of the perishing pot, a gourmet nuclear bomb. Bufang didn't know how powerful this perishing pot was. He only knew that when he threw this pot behind the bronze gate of the nether prison, it blew up the green hand, leaving only bones. The owner of that green hand was definitely not weak. Since the perishing pot could blow up his skin and flesh, it must be very powerful. However, Bufang didn't know exactly how strong it was. A hint of excitement appeared on Bufang's indifferent face. In that case, let this old woman see the horror of this perishing pot. Bufang grinned, his eyes shaking violently. A moment later, a dragon roar suddenly resounded in his spirit sea. The black tortoise roared, the vermilion bird cried, and the white tiger roared. The 4 artifact spirits appeared at the same time, causing Bufang's mental force to soar. Then, Bufang slowly pushed the perishing pot forward with his palm. It was as if he had completely cut off the string that stabilized the perishing pot. In an instant, a terrible fluctuation suddenly burst out. A rumbling sound rang out incessantly. A bright blue light burst out of the perishing pot and began to spin slowly. Huh! Bufang was shocked. Xiaopi! Bufang shouted. Xiaopi's compound eyes rolled. Then, carrying Bufang on his back, he turned into a golden stream of light and shot out at high speed. In an instant, he broke through the ceiling and sped toward the sky. The moment Bufang pushed out the perishing pot, Lin Damiai's expression changed dramatically. Her face twitched, and her wheat-colored skin seemed to turn deathly pale. Damn it! Dami Hayashi cursed. Then, in an instant, her figure flashed, and she appeared on the 7th floor. She called for her subordinates, and the group of people broke through the walls of Spring Breeze Pavilion, shot out, and fled. Chi-Si's face was pale. This kind of power, without hesitation, Chi-Si's figure flashed and turned into a fiery red brilliance. She grabbed the wrist of the sluggish chef Jing Yuan and rushed out of Spring Breeze Pavilion without looking back. Everyone was dumbfounded. Even the 2 great generals were fleeing like this. Everyone understood that something terrible was about to happen. So, they all fled. For a moment, Spring Breeze Pavilion was in chaos. The sound of tables and chairs collapsing and the sound of porcelain plates falling to the ground could be heard. All of them rang out incessantly. Granny Jean was furious. All of you, calm down. What's the chaos? With the 4 divine guards and the guards of Spring Breeze Pavilion here, you don't have to worry. Granny Jean slammed her walking stick and shouted. The chaotic crowd below was much quieter, but some people still rushed out of the gate of Spring Breeze Pavilion and fled into the distance. A bright blue light shot out. It wasn't fast. It slowly spun out. The hearts of the 4 divine guards trembled, but their faces did not relax at all. They floated in front of the azure perishing pot and looked at each other. Their golden hair fluttered in the wind as they stretched out their hands. An array emerged, slapping toward the azure perishing pot that was constantly spinning. The guards also unleashed their auras, which surged into the bodies of the 4 divine guards. This caused the formation to become even more solid. They wanted to block the perishing pot. See, with the 4 divine guards here, that man can't overturn the sky. Granny Jean sneered. Her words made many people in Spring Breeze Pavilion calm down, and their faces showed a relaxed expression. The escape of the 2 great generals made them think that the end of the world was coming. Rumble! However, just when everyone's expression had relaxed, a voice suddenly rang out. Just when Granny Jean finished speaking, a loud noise suddenly broke out. This sound was incomparably terrifying. In an instant it filled the entire goddess city. Waves of air burst out, turning into ripples that spread out in an instant. With a rumble, it set off a violent gale that swept through the entire goddess city. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to have fallen silent. Granny Jin's face was full of horror, and the walking stick that she was holding fell to the ground. She was completely dumbfounded. The diners under the Spring Breeze Pavilion were also in a daze. They found that all the sounds in their ears had disappeared. They couldn't hear anything. The world was silent, and only that quietly blooming white lotus was left. The lotus bloomed and kept growing bigger. Its petals fluttered in the air, covering everything. Under that white lotus, the array of the 4 divine guards couldn't even hold on for a breath before it was shattered. The 4 divine guards didn't even have the chance to scream as they were swallowed by the white lotus. The guards also spurted out blood. They wanted to escape, but it was too late. They were swallowed by the white lotus, silently. This scene in everyone's eyes, it was like the end of the world. Goddess City. At this moment, the bustling Goddess City was silent. Everyone stared blankly at the Spring Breeze Pavilion. They only saw the top of the Spring Breeze Pavilion explode, and a white lotus of energy suddenly bloomed. Covering the sky, it was as dazzling as the sun. Everyone was dumbfounded. Goddess City, the back hall of the palace. Dense hot air filled the air, covering the entire back hall. In the center of the back hall there was a hollowed-out pool. In the pool there was green hot water surging. Around the pool there were dragon-shaped statues. The dragon-shaped statues spat out hot water from their mouths, and the hot water gathered in the pool. Pink petals rippled in the pool, spinning in circles. In the misty pool filled with water vapor, there were 2 graceful figures playing around. Their white and tender arms seemed to be emitting hot air under the nourishment of the water. Their palms bent, scooping up water, sprinkling it on their neck. Instantly, the hot water slid down their fair skin. You blinked, half of her head submerged in the water. She looked at Empress Bai Luo, who was continuously sprinkling water on her body. This kind of activity made her very shy. All of a sudden, the entire pool shook, the water exploded, forming a whirlpool. That female King Biluo's movements paused. Then, his expression abruptly changed. Damn! This kind of fluctuation. Does she want to destroy the entire goddess city? Boom! A beam of light flashed. Empress Bai Luo dashed out of the pool, splashing water everywhere. Her red robe billowed, wrapping her soft, fair body. Her bare feet stepped on the void, dashing out of the palace, heading toward the distance. There, a terrifying lotus of destruction was spreading. It slowly became blurry, as though it was about to explode, turning into a mushroom cloud. Goddess City, in a corner, Hades' era was bewildered. He lifted his head to look at the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the distance. The lotus energy explosion made his face change dramatically. So domineering. Who's so arrogant to want to destroy the entire goddess city? All of a sudden, Era thought for a moment. Looking at the familiar golden light shooting into the sky, he dropped his jaw. OF*CK. Could it be that young Bufang? Chapter 11:27. The entire goddess city had fallen into silence. The incandescent brilliance was incomparably dazzling, blooming in the sky, dazzling and dazzling. Spring Breeze Pavilion, the tallest building in Goddess City, the most luxurious restaurant, under everyone's dumbfounded gazes, the top floor suddenly exploded, and the white energy lotus burst the roof. Gravel flew everywhere, and a terrible roar resounded through the world. Dami Hayashi, who had run far away with a group of subordinates, turned around and looked at the terrible scene. Her whole person was stunned, and she sucked in a breath of cold air. Her subordinates were all trembling in fear. Everyone's face was filled with fear. This was too terrifying. Was this really caused by that man? Chi-Si stepped on the void and whistled. The red dragon flapped its wings and soared into the sky, supporting its body. Chef Jing Yuan stood on the back of the red dragon, her whole person falling into a sluggish state. I didn't expect that man to have such means, Chi-Si sighed. She didn't think that she would be wrong. Although Bufang's cultivation was not strong, the fluctuations he caused were incomparably terrifying. First, it was the exploding beef meatball. Then, it was the dried pot that caused such terrible fluctuations. Spring Breeze Pavilion. Is it destroyed? Jing Yuan's eyes were dull as she looked at the incandescent Spring Breeze Pavilion, her body and mind trembling. Chi-Si sighed, urging the red dragon to fly further away. She knew that, judging from the energy fluctuations contained in the incandescent lotus, the destruction had just begun. In that fluctuation, Chi-Si felt despair. Facing that kind of fluctuation, she did not have the slightest courage to face it. No. Maybe the entire goddess city will be destroyed. The corner of Chi-Si's mouth twitched, and she said this with a depressed chest. Rumble. After a moment of silence, there was finally a big explosion. Flames rushed to the sky, and the energy of the explosion roared, causing a gust of wind. Everyone's ears were like thunder, and their eardrums were about to explode. Everyone was in a trance. The people around the Spring Breeze Pavilion quickly came back to their senses. In the next moment, they frantically fled in all directions in fear. If they didn't escape, they would all die when the destruction spread. In order to survive, everyone began to flee. The huge lotus continued to expand. It contained an incomparably terrifying power. As the energy expanded, the Spring Breeze Pavilion began to crumble inch by inch. Madame Jin's face was filled with disbelief. Her body was trembling and her face was filled with fear. However, what made her feel even worse was that the entire Spring Breeze Pavilion was crumbling under the destructive lotus. Spring Breeze Pavilion was her blood, sweat, and tears for so many years. But now it was destroyed. How could she bear it? Ah! I'll fight you to the death. Madame Jean waved her golden crutch and pointed it at the destructive lotus. The energy within the lotus surged, and the entire lotus dispersed. The next moment, Madame Jean, who was waving her golden crutch and shouting incessantly, was devoured. The ground beneath his feet also crumbled and turned into slag. Hualala, her red robe fluttered. A wave of energy filled the air. It was as if there was a brilliance falling from the sky. All the people who were fleeing in panic felt their minds freeze. They subconsciously raised their heads to look at the sky. There a graceful figure wrapped in a red robe, barefoot. Under the robe, one could vaguely see her straight and plump legs. Her long black hair fluttered in the wind, and her red lips were extremely hot. Empress Bai Luo stepped on the void, floating over. Looking at the blooming destructive lotus, her face was incomparably solemn. In the next moment, she raised her hand. Her figure instantly shot out as if she had teleported. Above her body, endless nether energy gushed out. The nether energy swept over, turning into a huge hand. That huge hand moved toward the destructive lotus. Slowly, the people who were running away stopped. They all looked up at the sky. The red dragon floated in the void, flapping its wings. Looking at the peerless beauty of Empress Bai Luo, who was walking barefoot in the air, a trace of fanaticism appeared on its face. Her Majesty has made a move. Her Majesty? Chef Jing Yuan also came to her senses, and her eyes flickered. Dami Hayashi ran far away with her men. When she saw the female King Biluo, she stopped. All right. Let's rest for a while. It's all right. The queen has made a move, so it's over. After saying that, Dami Hayashi looked at the slowly expanding white lotus in horror. She exhaled. That's King, exciting. That man Bufang had really done something big. Above the sky, a wave of energy rushed over. Xiaopi's speed bloomed to the extreme. He rushed to the sky, but soon, he reached the top. Above him was the ground. But it was enough. Bufang looked at the blooming lotus below, his face solemn. Then, a wave of exhaustion came over him. It came from his spirit sea. In order to use the perishing pot, his spirit sea's mental force was almost completely drained. Suddenly, Bufang froze. He looked into the distance. There, Empress Bai Luo, wearing a fluttering red robe, was breathtakingly beautiful. Her red lips were red as she clapped her delicate hand. The black hand of nether energy slapped the white lotus created by the perishing pot. The black nether energy spread out in an instant, then turned into wisps and wrapped around the white lotus, turning it into a black lotus. Kacha, the black nether energy solidified. Soon, the huge white lotus was frozen, and the destruction stopped. The huge black lotus blotted out the sky, making everyone suck in a breath of cold air. Fortunately, I made it in time. I can't even take a bath in peace. The female King Biluo hovered in front of the perishing pot. Looking at the huge lotus and the half-destroyed Spring Breeze Pavilion, she blinked her long eyelashes. Spring Breeze Pavilion? The queen froze. Then, she seemed to think of something, and her face bloomed with a beautiful smile. It happened in Spring Breeze Pavilion? It seems that man wanted to get the qualification to cook for the imperial feast, which caused it. The queen shook her head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. A moment later, she raised her hands and pressed them on the perishing pot. Rumble! With a loud noise, the Spring Breeze Pavilion shook violently, and rubble rolled down. The huge black lotus was lifted by the female King Biluo. With a tap of her feet, her lady queen strode forward and floated into the air. She lifted the black lotus of destruction, which was the size of a small mountain, and flew into the distance. Shortly after, she left Goddess City. Qi rode her red dragon and chased after her. Soon, she saw the female King Biluo carrying the huge perishing pot to a wasteland outside Goddess City. She took a deep breath. Suddenly, she threw the huge lotus out. A crashing sound resounded. The female King Biluo clapped her hands and let out a long breath. That fluctuation actually contained the will of the Great Path. No wonder its power was so terrifying. He's really a crazy man. Fortunately, I's ability is great and I can hold on. Bai Luo raised her beautiful eyebrows, and her graceful figure stretched in the void, forming a shocking arc. Qi rushed over. Standing on the back of the red dragon, she bowed to the female King Biluo. Chef Jing Yuan also hurriedly bowed. Okay, get up. Little Qi, since you were here, why didn't you stop that crazy man? You know that, if that thing completely exploded, half of Goddess City would be gone. Queen Bai Luo said with some dissatisfaction. Qi's face suddenly turned red, and she was a little embarrassed. She didn't know that Bufang would use such a terrible method. Rumble! Rumble! Suddenly, the whole world seemed to shake. A gust of wind howled. Qi's heart trembled. Raising her head, she looked into the distance. That was the position of the Lotus of Destruction that was frozen by the Queen. An explosion resounded. A huge mushroom cloud rose into the sky, hitting the ground, causing the top of the earth to constantly tremble. It was as if heaven and earth were being destroyed. Fortunately, I threw it far away. Otherwise, who could bear this explosion? The female King Biluo was a little helpless. Qi swallowed a mouthful of saliva, her face full of horror. Okay, let's go back to the city. The energy fluctuation there hasn't dissipated so quickly. It should disappear in a few days. An attack that contains the will of the Great Path is naturally extraordinary, the Queen said. Then, she flew back to Goddess City. Halfway through the flight, the female King Biluo suddenly raised her head, looking at a golden shadow in the sky. Her red lips curled up, revealing a trace of a playful smile. Chi-Si and the Queen returned to Goddess City. At this moment, the entire Goddess City was in chaos. Fortunately, the guards were dispatched, suppressing the chaos. The Queen swayed her graceful figure back to the front of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Looking at the half-destroyed Spring Breeze Pavilion, she couldn't help but be a little speechless. "Tell me, what's going on?" The female King Biluo sat on a chair, crossed her legs, and asked. Chi-Si did not dare to hide anything and hurriedly told her everything. Old Lady Jean kicked an iron plate this time. "Who told her to be so arrogant? I usually don't bother with her, but it increased her arrogance. She actually secretly organized an army and trained the 4 great divine guards." The female King Biluo held her chin and said lightly. Chi-Si did not dare to speak. "But it's good. That man has saved I the trouble of finding an excuse. Chi-Si, later, send someone to take over the Spring Breeze Pavilion. From today onwards, Spring Breeze Pavilion will belong to I." "Ah!" Chi-Si was stunned. She did not expect the Queen to make such a decision. "Won't it look like I'm taking advantage of the situation?" Chi-Si hesitated. "What are you afraid of?" Old Lady Jean reaped what she sowed. She was killed by that man's lotus of destruction. Now the Spring Breeze Pavilion is ownerless. If it doesn't belong to I, then who? The Queen said with a smile. Chi-Si was speechless. Looking at the Queen's appearance, it was obvious that she had been eyeing the Spring Breeze Pavilion for a long time. Sticking out her tongue, Chi-Si did not dare to say anything. After putting down Chef Jing Yuan, she gathered the Red Dragon Army to deal with the aftermath of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. In the sky, a golden brilliance quickly fell. Bufang stepped out from Xiaopi's back with a pale face. "You still know to come back. For the sake of the imperial feast, you almost destroyed Goddess City." The female King Biluo saw Bufang and suddenly rolled her eyes. Fortunately, she arrived before the energy completely exploded. She used a secret technique to temporarily seal the explosion and moved the source of the destruction away. Otherwise, half of Goddess City would have been destroyed. Bufang was silent. He did not expect the power of the perishing pot to be so terrifying. He had miscalculated. "For the sake of the imperial feast, did you have to go through so much trouble?" The female King Biluo complained. Her coquettish appearance made Bufang's eyebrows twitch. Was this woman sick in the head? "Didn't you say that I should find the qualification to cook for the imperial feast?" Chef Jing Yuan had agreed, so that old lady did not stop me. She even wanted to send people to break my legs and kill me. I just fought back. Bufang said expressionlessly. Bufang was a little weak now. He frowned and his mood was not very good. The female King Biluo glanced at Bufang. "This queen is not an unreasonable person. You and Jing Yuan can decide the qualification to cook for the imperial feast. Anyway, the imperial feast will be held in 7 days. At that time, I hope the imperial feast will not disappoint me." The female King Biluo supported her chin with her hand and said lazily. Jing Yuan nodded. Of course, Bufang had no objection. "Okay, I will come to you tomorrow for a cooking competition." Bufang exhaled and said. Jing Yuan's eyes suddenly became sharp as she stared at Bufang. "I know your cooking skills should be very good, but I will not easily give you the qualification to cook for the imperial feast." In the distance, a netherworld ship suddenly tore through the void and came over. On the netherworld ship, you sat on the bow, swinging her long, white legs. Bufang was a little surprised. "You!" The female King Biluo's eyes lit up when she saw you. Her figure flashed, and she hugged you, pressing the latter's head against her chest. "Sister Yu, are you here to worry about me? I am so powerful, I will be fine." Bufang looked at you, who was squeezed so hard that she could not breathe, and was a little confused. "You are very familiar with this woman?" After a long time, Yu's head popped out and she exhaled. She looked at Queen Bai Luo, who was blinking her eyes, and then looked at Bufang in the distance. After hesitating for a while, she frowned and looked at Bufang, saying, "Bufang, are you okay?" Hearing this, the female King Biluo's mind was in a mess, and her face was full of confusion. What happened to worrying about her sister? Chapter 11:28. Bufang, are you all right? Yu looked at Bufang and asked with a cold expression. Bufang shook his head. Of course, he was fine. Although throwing out a perishing pot consumed a lot of his mental force, it was still within a bearable range. Because of the 4 artifact spirits of the god of cooking set in his spirit sea, his mental force was very condensed, and the 4 artifact spirits were like 4 vortexes, constantly promoting the recovery of his mental force. Sister Yu, shouldn't you care about me? Why do you care about a man? You've changed. You weren't like this before. King Biluo glanced at Bufang, and then her pretty eyes fell on Yu. She curled her lips in dissatisfaction. She was the dignified queen of Goddess City, yet she couldn't compare to a stinky man? Bufang, I'm hungry. Yu stared at Bufang with her pitch-black eyes and said. Bufang ignored King Biluo's murderous glare. Bufang nodded. He didn't want you to come to Earth Prison, but since she was already here, he didn't mind. However, Bufang couldn't guarantee that Yinglong and the others wouldn't come to take you back. But if they really wanted to take you back, as long as you didn't come back, it wouldn't hurt to throw another perishing pot at them. Bufang thought to himself. Sister Yu, are you hungry? Tell me, and I'll immediately order the chef to cook something delicious for you. You can eat whatever you want, even the imperial feast won't be a problem. King Biluo put her arm around Yu's shoulder and said. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. This King Biluo was a fake, right? Why didn't she have the same majestic aura as when they met in the hall? Can the imperial feast suppress the curse on my body? Yu's pitch-black eyes turned and landed on the female King Biluo as she asked. King Biluo was stunned. She bit her lips and shook her head. The curse on Yu is not an ordinary one. How can she suppress it with a single imperial feast? If the imperial feast can suppress it, then so what if she makes you the imperial feast every day? Bufang's dishes can suppress the curse on me, Yu said. As soon as he said that, King Biluo's pupils shrank. Then, she looked at Bufang in bewilderment. Dishes can suppress curses? This was really refreshing for the female King Biluo. Although she didn't believe it, seeing how serious Yu was, King Biluo reluctantly believed it. Oh right. You killed Madame Jean. I'm afraid there will be a lot of trouble. The High Priestess won't forgive you. As for the High Priestess, I don't care about you. King Biluo thought for a moment and said to Bufang. Bufang was stunned. Then, he understood. That's right. Madame Jean could open a restaurant at the level of Spring Breeze Pavilion in Goddess City. If she didn't have someone behind her, it wouldn't make sense. Spring Breeze Pavilion had a huge profit potential. If it weren't for the support of the higher-ups of Goddess City, it would have been swallowed up by others. But this time, the High Priestess is in the wrong. That Madame Jean dared to privately organize divine guards and an army. She didn't put this queen in her eyes. The High Priestess can only grit her teeth and swallow it. You don't have to worry. Prepare for tomorrow's cooking competition. King Biluo looked at Bufang. After the matter was settled, the group of people dispersed. King Biluo asked Qi Si to deal with the aftermath and organize the security of Goddess City. Because of what happened just now, there was a certain degree of panic. However, these weren't big things, so King Biluo was too lazy to move. Bufang cooked a dish for you, and you ate it all with relish. Then, while Bufang was still in a daze, King Biluo pulled you away. Bufang's mouth twitched. Thinking of King Biluo's sharp warning eyes before she left, he was quite speechless. After King Biluo disappeared, Bufang paced a few steps with his hands clasped behind his back. Gently exhaling, Bufang's mind flickered, and his entire body entered the heaven and earth farmland. Right now, he didn't have a single nether crystal, so he couldn't find an inn. It was better to enter the heaven and earth farmland. He just happened to go to the heaven and earth farmland to prepare for tomorrow's cooking competition. He couldn't give up the qualification to cook for the imperial feast. If he wanted to enter the god-vanishing mountain, only King Biluo would agree. Right after Bufang's figure disappeared, a figure wrapped in a black robe suddenly appeared. Looking at the empty ground, he puzzledly scratched his head. Where did Bufang young man go? He was here a moment ago, and he disappeared in the blink of an eye? Goddess City, Sacrificial Sect Palace. In the main hall, a graceful figure stood in front of the window with her hands hanging down. Her calm eyes looked straight into the distance, and her eyes were like an ancient well without any ripples. Outside the door, there was a commotion. A woman wearing a thick robe and a crown slowly walked in. Her hands were clasped together as she knelt on the ground. High Priestess, Spring Breeze Pavilion has been destroyed. Her Highness has ordered the Red Dragon Army's General Chi Si to take Spring Breeze Pavilion. Spring Breeze Pavilion's Grandma Jean, as well as the 4 great divine guards that we have trained, have all fallen. Our spies in Spring Breeze Pavilion have all been removed. The woman wearing a crown had an ugly expression as she said with a serious tone. She looked at the woman standing in front of the window with her hands clasped behind her back. That was a peerlessly beautiful woman. She was indifferent like a fairy, and her body was filled with an ethereal aura. However, she looked as though she could fly away at any moment. The woman's long black hair spread out, and there was no decoration on her head. Wearing a long white robe, she slowly turned around. The High Priestess slightly pursed her red lips. I already know the cause of the Spring Breeze Pavilion incident. It was because of a man that my Spring Breeze Pavilion was destroyed. Her Highness may have had designs on Spring Breeze Pavilion for a long time. Perhaps this man destroying Spring Breeze Pavilion was largely part of the Queen's plan. No, with the Queen's laziness, it's impossible for her to come up with such a plan, the High Priestess pondered. Her skin was whiter than snow, and it was as white as jade, crystal clear. The woman wearing a crown knelt on the ground, not daring to breathe loudly. After a long time, the High Priestess raised her head. Her eyes were calm, and her red lips slightly twitched. Do something for me. This man destroyed the Spring Breeze Pavilion, so I naturally can't let him go. Once the Spring Breeze Pavilion is destroyed, the nether crystals that the Sacrificial Sect Mansion receives will be greatly reduced. This is not a small price to pay. Go and bring that man back. He naturally has to pay the price for destroying my Spring Breeze Pavilion, regardless of whether this man is the Queen's man or not. Also, I'm very interested in the destructive lotus he used. If I can use the energy contained in it, the High Priestess said in a deep voice. The woman wearing a crown listened quietly. When the High Priestess no longer spoke, she bowed, said her goodbyes, and left the room. When she walked out of the room, the pressure on her body was instantly relieved. The pressure the High Priestess gave her was too great. Her eyes turned, and her face became incomparably serious. Finding a man in Goddess City couldn't be any easier for her because she was in control of one of the 5 great armies of Goddess City. With an order, the entire army began to move, searching the entire city. If the High Priestess wanted to take someone away, no one dared to stop her. However, they were about to miscalculate. Even after searching the entire city, they couldn't find any trace of that man. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. After searching for a whole night, the guards were all dumbfounded. The woman wearing a crown furrowed her brows. If she couldn't find him, how could she explain it to the High Priestess? However, after thinking about it carefully, the corners of her mouth suddenly twitched. She knew that tomorrow, Bufang would definitely appear. If he wanted to obtain the qualification to cook for the imperial feast, he had to appear and compete with Chef Jing Yuan. At that time, it would be time to capture him. Heaven and Earth Farmland. Bufang landed in front of the wooden house. A warm breeze blew over, bringing with it the fragrance of grass, immortal ingredients, and a sweet breeze accompanied by water vapor. The sky was clear, with clouds slowly drifting. After Bufang appeared in the Heaven and Earth Farmland, Nyo Han-san also appeared. Recently, this fellow had been studying how to put the will of the Great Path into ingredient. The power of the perishing pot they had created was indeed amazing. Recently, Nyo Han-san was very excited. Apparently, he had gained a lot. Owner Bu, you're finally here. This old bull has good news for you. Nyo Han-san said to Bufang, narrowing his pair of slits. Then, he brought Bufang into the wooden house. He took out a wooden barrel. Then, he opened the lid of the barrel. Bufang froze for a moment, because from the wooden barrel, a rich fragrance of milk wafted out. White milk flowed in it. This is the milk of the spotted cow that Owner Bu brought in. I first put the will of the Great Path into the body of the spotted cow, and the milk produced also contains the will of the Great Path. And it's even purer. Nyo Han-san grinned. He seemed to be very proud of his work. Bufang was a little surprised. There was such a thing? Sure enough, the title Father of Hybridization was not just for show. Bufang took the wooden spoon and scooped a spoonful of milk. Swish! The rich aroma of milk immediately filled the air. This aroma was refreshing and seemed to be somewhat sweet. The silky milk flowed down from the wooden spoon. A hint of surprise flashed in Bufang's eyes. He took a sip of the milk. As soon as the milk entered his mouth, it spread out. The sweet milk made Bufang's eyes light up. The pure will of the Great Path contained in the milk surprised Bufang. The will of the Great Path was different from the previous ones. The pure will of the Great Path was very stable. Even if the gourmet array was added, it would not necessarily explode. However, the pure will of the Great Path added to the milk made the taste even purer. Bufang took a big gulp. His mouth was filled with the aftertaste of the milk. Looking at the milk, Bufang's eyes narrowed. Many new cooking methods appeared in his mind. There should be a lot of dairy products now. The system would also provide milk, but it would only provide ordinary milk. It would not be as delicious as this milk that contained the will of the Great Path. Hence, in the past, Bufang rarely thought about making dairy product. Now that he saw this milk, his mind became active, and he could not stop thinking about it. Owner Bu, when are you going to get some good spirit fruits? Our Heaven and Earth Farmland does not lack anything but top-grade spirit fruit. For example, the vermilion fruit. Nyo Han-san looked at Bufang, rubbing his hands. Bufang covered the milk and looked at Nyo Han-san, thinking for a while. If he could really get the vermilion fruit, it would be good. The vermilion fruit could make wine and even vinegar. Bufang lacked a good vinegar. When he was in the Hidden Dragon continent, he decided to make vinegar, but he did not have time. Now that he had the Heaven and Earth Farmland, he could put it into action. It is not easy to find a spirit fruit at the level of the vermilion fruit. But don't be anxious. I will look for it later. I will bring a vermilion fruit tree back. Bufang thought for a while and said. Nyo Hansen's eyes instantly lit up. Owner Bu was domineering. He had wanted Bufang to bring back a vermilion fruit tree seed and slowly cultivate it. He did not expect that Owner Bu would directly bring back a tree. Domineering! Nyo Han-san had a wish in his heart, and that was to make this Heaven and Earth Farmland into a top-grade farmland. Cultivating the Heaven tree, nurturing immortal essence, and immortal fruits and immortal materials everywhere, that sense of accomplishment would definitely intoxicate Nyo Han-san. Of course, the current Heaven and Earth Farmland was still far from that level. By the way, Owner Bu, the seed you gave me still cannot sprout. Owner Bu needs to find some energy with rich vitality to irrigate and stimulate it. Otherwise, it will be difficult for the seed to germinate. Nyo Han-san said. Bufang furrowed his brows. Speaking of seeds, Bufang thought about entering the god-vanishing mountain. It seemed that he had to win the cooking competition tomorrow. He could not afford to waste time. The Heaven Chief realm was constantly declining. The more time he wasted, the deeper the Heaven Chief realm would fall. Picking up the wooden bucket of milk, Bufang said goodbye to Nyohan-san, then turned around and left the Heaven and Earth farmland. Watching Bufang leave, Nyohan-san clasped his hands, humming a tune as he walked toward the back of the wooden house. Shortly after, the angry mooing of a cow echoed in the Heaven and Earth farmland. Bufang put the wooden bucket of milk into the system-dimensional bag. His figure then returned to Goddess City. However, as soon as he appeared on the streets of Goddess City, countless gazes shot over, locking on his body. Waves of cold aura brushed against his face. Bufang was bewildered, lifting his head to look. Then, he saw the sound of air being torn around him. Soldiers wearing armor swarmed around, brandishing their weapons and surrounding him. Chapter 11:29. Bufang froze for a moment and looked around in confusion. He was surrounded by a group of armored guards. What are they doing? Bufang was puzzled. Why was he surrounded by so many people as soon as he appeared? Obviously, Bufang could feel that this group of people had been looking for him since the beginning. Because as soon as he appeared, this group of people appeared and surrounded him. Their target was clear. Could it be that the Empress was jealous of Yu's attitude toward him, so she sent someone to attack him? Bufang couldn't help but think, but he quickly threw the idea out of his head. This was obviously unrealistic. The female King Biluo didn't look like a narrow-minded person at first glance. Then who could it be? Bufang furrowed his brows, then his heart moved. Was it the person behind the Spring Breeze Pavilion? Was it someone who supported Madame Jean? Her Majesty the Empress seemed to have warned him that someone would deal with him. Now, what was supposed to come had come. However, it seemed that the other party's power was not small. They could actually mobilize an army to capture him. Judging from the clothes of these people, they should be the so-called guards. The guards of Goddess City? Bufang's eyes narrowed. Knowing that he had a great killing tool like the perishing pot, this group of people still dared to deal with him like this? Weren't they afraid that he would take out another perishing pot? Although Bufang couldn't take out a perishing pot, this should be a deterrent. Ordinary people wouldn't dare to deal with him at all. But swoosh. The group of people who surrounded Bufang retreated one after another, revealing a passage. A figure walked out from the passageway with quick step. It was a woman wearing a loose ceremonial robe. The woman's hair was coiled up, and she had long eyeshadow on her face. Her eyebrows were slender like willow leaves. Her scarlet lips were gently pursed. She looked beautiful, but she had an oppressive pressure that made people not dare to breathe loudly. The woman walked out of the crowd and looked at Bufang from a distance. "Man, after searching for a whole night, I finally found you," the crowned woman said. Her voice was cold. "Looking for me? The person behind the Spring Breeze Pavilion?" Bufang said lightly with his hands clasped behind his back. He frowned as he looked at the group of guards and the crowned woman with an intimidating aura. These people were much more difficult to deal with than the 4 divine guards of Spring Breeze Pavilion. The aura of the crowned woman was almost comparable to that of Sector Lord Dit. If it weren't for the perishing pot, Bufang would have a hard time dealing with them. "We mean no harm. The High Priest wants to see you. The destructive technique you used earlier was not yours. The High Priest is very interested in that technique," the crowned woman said. Her words were always so formulaic. Bufang was taken aback. He didn't expect that the other party was actually after the perishing pot in his hand. This so-called high priest was truly gutsy, wasn't he? "Aren't you afraid that I will kill all of you with my perishing pot?" Bufang said coldly. He looked at the crowned woman, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. "Your face betrayed you. The high priest also said that you can't borrow that kind of external force for a second time in a short period of time. Your mental force is not strong enough. The crowned woman seemed to have seen through everything and came prepared. It was as if all of Bu Fang's paths were blocked. So, come with us, the crowned woman said. She put her hands together, her sleeves hanging down, and bowed to Bu Fang. Her attitude seemed gentle, but in fact, it was amazing. Bu Fang narrowed his eyes. The women of Goddess City were really strong. However, Bu Fang naturally couldn't just follow them like this. He still had to rush to the cooking competition. Otherwise, if he missed the opportunity to compete in cooking, he would lose the qualification to cook for the imperial feast. The atmosphere suddenly became a little stagnant. The woman bowed, but Bu Fang didn't move. The woman's eyes turned and fell on Bu Fang, and her face trembled slightly. You refuse a toast, only to drink a forfeit, the crowned woman said. The next moment, her figure moved. In an instant, a series of afterimages flashed, and her long sleeves rolled up, grabbing towards Bu Fang. Bu Fang's eyes shrank. He could feel that the air around him was completely sucked out by this claw. This claw oppressed him mercilessly. Bu Fang's mind moved. Instantly, streaks of golden flowing light shot out. Bu Fang held an explosive meatball with 2 fingers, bit it, and flicked it. Boom! The explosive meatball turned into a golden stream of light and was thrown towards the crowned woman. It tore through the air, causing the void to tremble constantly. There was an explosion, and the fire rose to the sky. The terrifying energy ripples spread and continued to spread. The fire quickly dissipated, and then from the fire, a figure rushed out, taking small steps, still rushing towards Bu Fang. The surrounding guards all pulled out their weapons, and the sharp aura went straight towards Bu Fang. Boom! Bu Fang felt as though the ground around him had sunk. The explosive meatball could not pose a threat to the woman. She rolled her sleeves, the fire dissipated, and the woman's eyes became sharper. In just an instant, she appeared in front of Bu Fang. Bu Fang took a deep breath. Then, there seemed to be a vermilion bird in his eyes, and the vermilion robe on his body suddenly turned crimson, and the flaming feathers on his back burned and fluttered. The black turtle constellation walk appeared in Bu Fang's hands, and Bu Fang held it with one hand. It's useless, your resistance is futile, the crowned woman said with an expressionless face. If Bu Fang could use the perishing pot, then the crowned woman would turn around and run away without saying a word. However, the high priestess said that Bu Fang could only use the perishing pot once, and it would be impossible for him to use it a second time in a short period of time, because that kind of attack required too much mental energy. With the cultivation of a 3-star true immortal realm, it was impossible to use it a second time. This was the crowned woman's trump card. Chi Chi Chi, the black turtle constellation walk spun in front of Bu Fang. Bu Fang's black hair spread out, and his face was expressionless. Suddenly, the crowned woman's face suddenly changed. Her heart trembled. She frowned and looked into the distance. There, a figure wrapped in a black robe let out a cold snort. The figure burst out an afterimage, and arrived in an instant. "Who is it?" the crowned woman shouted. The black-robed man appeared in front of Bu Fang with a swoosh. He raised his palm, and the sleeves of the black robe fell down, revealing his palm. The palm was bent, revealing a middle finger. A middle finger? The crowned woman's face froze, and then her anger surged. The surrounding guards also had sharp eyes, and they shouted loudly. The clanging sound resounded, and their weapons were unsheathed. "How dare you, rude person!" the crowned woman shouted angrily, and her pretty white face turned red. Bu Fang looked at the black-robed man in confusion. "Do you know what this is called?" The figure wrapped in the black robe spoke, and the familiar words made Bu Fang suddenly stunned. This voice, this finger is called Hades' Clothes Stripping Finger. The familiar voice had a playful tone, and the next moment, a finger was suddenly pointed out. The monstrous nether energy continued to gather, and soon a clear finger was condensed in the void. The finger was pointed at the crowned woman. The void seemed to be constantly distorted under this finger. Hades' clothes stripping finger, one stripping. The wind whistled, blowing away the black-robed man's veil, revealing a handsome and melancholy face. The face was full of vicissitudes. The crowned woman's claw and Hades's finger collided. The terrifying energy spread out. The crowned woman was directly blasted out, staggered back, and her face became pale. Tearing sound, crowned lady's face suddenly changed, and a strong aura continued to entangle her, moving up her arm. The sleeves of her robe were torn apart by the powerful chi, revealing her white and tender arms. However, the aftermath of the force could only tear the sleeves. Unfortunately, I did not complete the stripping. The clothes stripping finger is still a little lacking. Hades' era raised his hand and covered half of his face, his eyes bursting with melancholy. Bufang looked at Hades' era, holding the black turtle constellation walk, and was a little confused for a moment. Era? Bufang said softly. Oh, Bufang young man, I finally found you, but it took a long time to find you. When Hades' era heard Bufang calling his name, he suddenly turned his head with a smile on his face and looked at Bufang. His enthusiasm made Bufang slightly surprised. Why are you here? Bufang thought for a while and asked. Isn't this Goddess City? I smelled the spicy strip from afar. I missed the spicy strip, oh. I missed you, so I rushed over. Hades' era said. Suddenly, a terrifying gust of wind arose from behind Nether King Erha. Bufang suddenly frowned and said, Be careful. Nether King Erha grinned, slowly turning his head. Then, he stretched out a finger, pointing it out. Ever since this king returned to hell, this king has turned over a new leaf and diligently cultivated. Finally, this king has cleared the 18 Ghost King passes that father set up for me. 10 levels. Now, this king is very awesome, just a woman. I can strip her clothes with one finger. Nether King Erha's solemn voice rang out. The next moment, he pointed his finger behind him. Suddenly, a formation appeared around the figure of the crowned lady. The Nether King's finger had actually pierced through the woman's body. Hades' era suddenly froze. Then, a terrible whirlwind burst out from behind him. The whirlwind completely shredded the black robe on his body. Bufang held the black turtle constellation walk in one hand and looked at Hades' era with an expressionless face. What happened to being so powerful? The crowned woman glanced at Hades' era coldly. Pervert! How dare you break into my goddess city? Take him down! The crowned woman said coldly, and ordered the guards to attack. The sound of the clanging was endless. The next moment, the guards all rushed towards Hades' era. The black robe was torn apart, revealing a spacious white robe. Hades' era's white chest was exposed, and half of his face was covered with melancholy. This is what you forced I to do. It's time to show the real Hades' stripping finger. Come on. Let's hurt each other. Buzz, Nether King Erha's body suddenly released a wave of ferocious nether energy. The nether energy soared into the sky, as if it had turned into a black pillar of nether energy. His figure disappeared in an instant. A terrible pressure spread out. Boom, boom. One finger pointed out. These guards suddenly let out a scream of horror. Because the armor on their bodies had collapsed, leaving only their underwear fluttering in the wind, the crowned woman's eyes suddenly shrank. She took a breath of cold air. A little saint-level powerhouse? The crowned woman screamed. Suddenly, her eyes shrank. That was because the handsome figure had appeared in front of her without her noticing. He placed a finger on her forehead. A gust of wind blew. The sound of clothes tearing was endless. The next moment, there was the sharp scream of the crowned woman. In the distance, Bufang put away the black turtle constellation walk and gently exhaled. Looking at the group of guards who were stripped to their underwear by Nether King Erha, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. So Era is like this, Hades. Chapter 1130. There was a tearing sound. The sound of clothes tearing suddenly resounded. The entire place was silent, and the surrounding guards who were hugging their bodies and screaming were all stunned. Because they found that under the man's finger, their leader's clothes were also torn. Only her undergarments were exposed, that white skin was reflected in everyone's eyes. The crowned woman's hair suddenly fell apart, and her dark hair fluttered continuously. Hades' era floated in the void, pointed at the woman's eyebrows, and blinked. Then Hades' era's eyes slid down and he grinned. Figure not bad. The crowned woman's pupils shrank, and her face suddenly turned red. Bufang couldn't help but touch his forehead. Buzz, the crowned woman gritted her teeth, and a magic array floated above her palm, and she slapped towards Hades' era. Hades' era's figure suddenly flew out, and after a while, he flew and landed beside Bufang. The crowned woman, who was stripped naked, almost cried. This kind of humiliation was simply unbearable. Pervert! I will kill you! Biting her red lips, the woman was so angry that her whole body was trembling. But just as she was about to make a move, there was a sudden sound in the void. Her figure suddenly stiffened, and she turned her head to look into the distance. There, a figure in a white robe slowly stepped on the air. Greetings, High Priestess. The crowned woman's long hair spread out, and she knelt on the ground. Her beautiful figure, with this action, suddenly appeared an amazing arc. The high priest walked in the air like an immortal that had descended from the heavens. Her eyes were extremely calm. The void seemed to be completely stagnant at this moment. Hades' era stared at the high priestess, who was stepping on the air, and took a deep breath. I did not expect the Lord of Netherworld to come to Goddess City in person. The High Priestess of Goddess City did not welcome you. I hope Lord Hades can forgive me. The High Priestess stepped on the air, and her voice resounded like an empty valley. His black hair and white robes fluttered in the wind. Wei Jin apologized to His Highness, the Nether King. She has offended the Lord of the Netherworld, so she must apologize. The high priest's gaze fell on the crowned girl who was kneeling on the ground. The woman shuddered. The Lord of the Netherworld? This scoundrel was actually the Lord of Netherworld. However, she was also a little surprised. The Lord of the Netherworld, to Goddess City, this status was extraordinary. The first man to enter Goddess City was also called the Lord of the Netherworld. Alright, don't mind it. I don't care about these formalities. Hades' era's face reddened a little. Not only did he rip off the other party's clothes, he even wanted the other party to apologize. Even he felt a little embarrassed. However, he had a sense of propriety. In Goddess City, as the Lord of the Netherworld, he could not kill as he pleased. Otherwise, with his current strength, it would be very easy for him to kill these women. But, because of his dissolute father, he couldn't kill anyone in Goddess City. Since His Excellency Hades is magnanimous, then I will thank His Excellency Hades on behalf of Wei Jin, the High Priestess said coldly. She pointed her bare feet in the air. In the next moment, she waved her wide sleeves, as if covering the sky. With a roll of her sleeves, Wei Jin and her guards disappeared. Bufang couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he saw this move. Hades' era's eyes also shrank. His Excellency Hades, eat and drink well. I have something to do, so I will leave first. The High Priestess glanced at Hades' era, then her gaze fell on Bufang. That playful gaze caused Bufang's heart to skip a beat. It was as if this woman had seen through everything about him with a single glance. This woman's strength was definitely not ordinary. The High Priestess glanced at Bufang, then turned and stepped into the air. Very quickly, she disappeared from Bufang and Hades' era's line of sight. The women of Goddess City are all abnormal, Hades' era said, smacking his lips. That woman is very strong, Bufang said. Of course she's strong. After all, she represents the Forbidden Land, God Vanishing Mountain. Even that stinky dragon, Long, doesn't dare to offend Goddess City. If it wasn't for Goddess City not appearing, the situation in Earth Prison would have changed a long time ago. Hades' era said, as if it was a matter of fact. Earth Prison's 3 great forbidden lands. Each forbidden land had a representative force, and each force was incomparably strong. Moreover, within the forbidden land, there was a supreme existence sleeping. It was a forbidden land that belonged to Earth Prison. All right, I want to enter God Vanishing Mountain. Do you have any way? Bufang asked as he looked at Hades' era. Enter God Vanishing Mountain? Why are you going to that broken place? Hades' era furrowed his brows, looking at Bufang, a little doubtful. The Heaven Chief world is on the verge of collapse, and the Heaven Tree's seed is in a deep sleep. It needs to be awakened by the Spring of Life. The Spring of Life is in God Vanishing Mountain, so I want to go. Bufang said concisely. The Heaven Chief world is going to collapse? TSK. That exhibitionist can't hold on anymore? I already knew that the Heaven Chief world would definitely be targeted by Nether Prison. Hades' era rubbed his chin. The Spring of Life is indeed in God Vanishing Mountain, but even if you go in, it will be very hard to get it. Are you sure you want to go in? Hades' era said. Bufang looked at him, curling his lips. There's no other way. Alright, I also don't have a way to enter God Vanishing Mountain. If you want to enter, you have to talk to that crazy woman in Goddess City. She has a way to let you in. Hades' era said. Bufang rolled his eyes. If there was no way, he should have said it earlier. Got it. I'm going to participate in the cooking competition to obtain the cooking qualifications for the Imperial Feast. Then, I'll conquer the Queen and obtain the qualifications to enter God Vanishing Mountain, Bufang said. After saying that, he turned around and walked into the distance. His feet stepped on the ground, and with an explosion, his figure shot out. Bufang, young man, wants to conquer that crazy woman? Hades' era froze. However, when he came back to his senses, Bufang had already appeared in the distance. Bufang, young man, wait for that. Give I a spicy strip to satisfy my craving. Goddess City, Dragon Playing Lake. At this moment, the Dragon Playing Lake was already surrounded by people. The crowd moved as many people curiously looked at the empty plaza beside the Dragon Playing Lake. Over there were armored soldiers, who had cleared out an empty space. In that empty space, several figures were sitting there. A radiant stove was placed on that empty space. Chef Jing Yuan crossed her arms in front of her chest, wearing a neat chef robe. Her face was extremely serious as she stood at her spot. Her eyelids drooped, looking at the stove as though she was thinking. She was waiting for Bufang's arrival. She would definitely not give up the cooking qualifications for the Imperial Feast so easily. She didn't know Bufang's cooking level, but she was very clear that Bufang's cooking level wasn't weak. From the bursting beef meatballs and the perishing pot, it could be seen. Although those were 2 dishes with destructive energy just from the aroma that diffused, it was definitely not ordinary. It wasn't something that ordinary chefs could cook. The surrounding people already knew what they were going to do here. Although the qualification for the Imperial Feast had already ended, but just yesterday, something big happened that shocked the whole city. The Spring Breeze Pavilion was blown up. It was blown up by a man. The whole story was also dug out. Goddess City was a city of women, and the speed at which gossip spread was incomparably fast. The speed at which gossip spread meant that the speed at which information spread was also fast. Hence, the news that a man from the outside world was going to compete with the chef of the Spring Breeze Pavilion for the qualification to cook for the Imperial Feast spread throughout the city. Everyone was looking forward to it. They had been waiting by the Dragon Playing Lake for a long time. However, now a long time had passed, and that man still hadn't appeared. This made the people who had been waiting for a long time a little restless. Dragon Playing Lake, in the square, Chi-Si was wearing a red robe, sitting on a chair. In front of her was a small table made of nanmu. Beside her was the carefree Dami Hayashi. In addition to Dami Hayashi, there was another person. It was a woman who wasn't very beautiful. She had a rough figure, and her aura was very strong. This person was a general of the Black Dragon Army, and her strength wasn't any weaker than Chi-Si and Dami Hayashi. The three of them were the judges of this cooking competition. This lineup had actually made the surrounding onlookers suck in a breath of cold air. It was rare for the generals of the three armies to be the judges. However, after waiting for a long time, that man still didn't appear. That man couldn't be afraid, right? I heard that men are the kind of people who like to talk big. This man definitely doesn't dare to compete with Chef Jing Yuan, so he ran away. Chef Jing Yuan is the chef of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. She has always been a chef who cooks for the imperial feast. Who knows where this man came from, but he dared to challenge Chef Jing Yuan. The onlookers chattered, each giving their own reasons. In their opinion, Bufang must be afraid of losing and losing face, so he didn't dare to show up. Chef Jing Yuan was unmoved. The stipulated time hadn't arrived yet. From Bufang's attitude, it could be seen that he really wanted to qualify for the imperial feast, so Bufang would never easily give up this opportunity. Bufang would definitely come. Jing Yuan didn't dare to relax for the slightest. Dami Hayashi sat on the chair and walked away. She supported her chin with one hand, looking bored. That man Bufang, could it be that he was really afraid? Yesterday, he made a solemn vow and even destroyed the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Today, he became a turtle. Men. Sure enough, as recorded in the ancient books, they were all fickle. Dami Hayashi yawned. Suddenly, when she yawned to the climax, the crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. Dami Hayashi almost choked on her yawn. She raised her head and looked over. Over there, the crowd parted, and two figures slowly walked out from within. Those two people, what the F***ck? When Dami Hayashi saw the two figures, she immediately cursed. Wasn't there only one man in Goddess City? What was going on with the man beside Bufang with his bare chest? Could it be that this guy had a sex change and sneaked into Goddess City? Chi-Si was also slightly stunned. The meticulous Black Dragon General narrowed his eyes. Hades Era narrowed his eyes, holding a spicy strip in his mouth. His whole body was trembling. This was the enhanced version of the spicy strip, the enhanced version of the abyssal spicy strip. The taste of the abyss was more intense, and the overall taste was improved. The taste made Hades Era unable to extricate himself. What did Bufang do in the Heaven Chief realm? The spicy strip had been upgraded. The crowd parted, forming a path. Then, Bufang and Hades Era walked all the way, quickly arriving at the dragon-playing lake. Two men. That man didn't escape. It's really surprising. Does he really think that he can be compared to Chef Jing Yuan? How could Chef Jing Yuan lose to that man? When the crowd saw Bufang appear, they immediately began to discuss. The chattering sounds piled up, instantly resounding through the void. Jing Yuan raised her head, looking straight at Bufang, her eyes filled with a dignified look. "You're finally here," Jing Yuan said. "Sorry, something happened on the way, so I was delayed for a while," Bufang said with an expressionless face. From his face, one could not see the slightest trace of embarrassment. "It's okay. I didn't wait for long," Jing Yuan said with a tense face. Hades Era, on the other hand, held the spicy strip in his mouth, walking to the side, watching Bufang cook with interest. Bufang, that young man, was going to cook. It had been a long time since someone had seen that kind of artistic cooking. "Since you're here, let's start our cooking competition. I won't be lenient. I will never give up Her Majesty's right to cook for the imperial feast." Jing Yuan exhaled deeply, her beautiful voice echoing through the void. A moment later, her hand shook, and instantly, the sound of wooden boxes colliding resounded. In her hand, a knife rack appeared. That rack was filled with all kinds of kitchen knives. At this moment, Chef Jing Yuan's aura suddenly changed. Her aura soared into the sky. Bufang was a little bewildered. His eyes focused. He exhaled softly. What a strange heart of cooking path! Chapter 1131. Chef Jing Yuan's eyes were like torches, and her beautiful face was covered with a dignified expression. A knife holder appeared in her hand, and on it, there were all kinds of kitchen knives. The handles of these kitchen knives were made of spirit gold, and they seemed to be shining. The Imperial Feast Qualification Cooking Competition begins now. Qi Si leaned lazily on the chair, looking at Chef Jing Yuan and Bu Fong, her red lips parted slightly. Everyone in the square was excited, and they couldn't help but burst into cheers. Finally it began. This cooking competition had caused a big commotion. For this competition, the Spring Breeze Pavilion had exploded, so everyone was looking forward to how fierce this competition would be. The rules of the competition are that the two chefs will each cook a dish. I, the Red Dragon General Qi Si, the Green Dragon General Lin Damei, and the Black Dragon General He Mu will be the judges. They will taste and evaluate the dishes and make the final decision. The winner will obtain the right to cook for Her Majesty's Imperial Feast 6 days later. Qi Si stood up and said. Her voice wasn't loud, but at this moment it resounded throughout the entire place, allowing everyone to hear it. Bu Fong nodded expressionlessly. Chef Jing Yuan held a kitchen knife in her hand, her eyes incomparably firm. Hades Era, with a spicy strip in his mouth, stood on the side, enjoying the delicious food. He was very confident in Bu Fong. How could a young man like Bu Fong not be able to handle a little girl? If one spicy strip was not enough, then he would use 2 spicy strips. In the crowd, there was already a burst of noise. The discussion continued. However, with a wave of Qi Si's hand, everyone quieted down. As a Red Dragon General, Qi Si still had prestige in Goddess City. Hundreds of miles away from the square, a spirit gold chair was placed in the air. On the spirit gold chair there were 2 figures sitting. One was the Empress, who was wearing a big red robe and had flaming red lip. The other was Yu, who had a cold face. The 2 of them sat on the spirit gold chairs and looked at the square, as if they were looking forward to the match. Sister Yu, who do you think will win this cooking competition? Empress Bai Luo leaned on the spirit gold chair, supporting her chin with her hand. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she asked. Yu's pitch-black eyes stared into the distance. She looked at the calm Bu Fong and said indifferently, Bu Fong. Why? Chef Jing Yuan has been the head chef of the Imperial Feast for quite a few times. Her culinary skills are pretty good. I like her dishes very much. She's a nice girl. King Biluo blinked her big eyes and said to Yu. There's no particular reason. It's because he's Bu Fong. Since he debuted, he has never lost a cooking competition. Yu's rosy lips curled slightly as she said with a smile. Looking at Yu's expression, Queen Bai Luo was speechless. She rubbed her forehead and revealed a helpless expression. I can't believe I asked you such a stupid question. Little girl, you have completely become that little chef's brainless fan, Bu Fong said. Nethery gave Empress Bai Luo a sidelong glance and snorted. Sister, you don't believe me? Then let's bet. King Biluo's eyes suddenly lit up. Bet? Okay, what do we bet? Yu was stunned. Why were you so excited about a bet? I haven't thought of what to bet yet. How about the loser agrees to a request of the other party? Okay. This queen has never lost a bet. King Biluo's fiery red lips cracked and she laughed heartily. Yu was stunned and looked at King Biluo suspiciously. In the square, as Qi Si's words fell, Bu Fong and Jing Yuan also began to prepare to cook. This was not a chef's challenge, and Bu Fong would not have a chef's challenge for no reason. However, it was not a chef's challenge, but it did not mean that Bu Fong would relax. This cooking competition, he must win. As for what to cook, after thinking for a night in the Heaven and Earth farmland, Bu Fong also had an idea. This time, the dish would definitely shock everyone's eyes out. The heart of cooking path that Chef Jing Yuan released was very strong, but it was very strange. It could be said that it was the heart of cooking path, but although it was condensed, it was not as clear and firm as the heart of cooking path. In Bu Fang's perception, this woman seemed to be a little confused. He gave Chef Jing Yuan a deep look. Bu Fang gently exhaled. Then, he walked to his seat. His mind moved. Bu Fang reached out and touched his belt. Buzz, a buzzing sound rang out. In the next instant, a light flashed. It was as if there was a tiger's roar resounding, causing the hearts of the audience to jump. Boom! With a loud sound, a white tiger heaven stove was smashed on the ground by Bu Fang. Chef Jing Yuan's eyes instantly shrank. Looking at the white tiger heaven stove, she felt a huge pressure bearing down on her. This stove, Chef Jing Yuan took a deep breath, feeling a huge pressure that she had never felt before. However, she would not admit defeat like this. Only when there was pressure would there be motivation. As the #1 chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion for so many years, Jing Yuan's heart was also a little confused and tired. Her mind moved. Suddenly, the kitchen knives on the knife rack soared into the sky. Accompanied by a buzzing sound, they tore through the air, constantly spinning in the air. 2 kitchen knives were spinning. Chef Jing Yuan reached out her hand, grabbing the handles made of spirit gold. Her eyes were like torches. In the distance, the ingredients automatically flew over. Jing Yuan, who was holding onto 2 kitchen knives, waved them fiercely. A wave of knife light flashed. Instantly, those ingredients were like flying petals, falling unceasingly. Jing Yuan's knife was so fast that it was hard for people to catch it. It's Chef Jing Yuan's 2-blade knife skill. What an incomparably cool knife skill. It's really unbelievable. It's been a long time since I saw Chef Jing Yuan show her cooking skills. That kind of cooking is like art. The surrounding crowd was chattering excitedly. They talked non-stop, and everyone's faces were filled with excitement. It was as if being able to see Jing Yuan's cooking was a supreme honor. Once Jing Yuan entered the state of cooking, she became very serious. Every swing of the knife would cut the ingredients perfectly. Moreover, the depth of the knife and the horizontal length of the knife were all precisely calculated. She had practiced these knife skills for countless years, and she had long been familiar with them. When she performed them, there was not a single mistake. Just as she understood, if she wanted to become a great chef, she had to practice day and night. She had to practice knife skills, cooking techniques, fire control, and other skills skillfully. Only then would she be able to bring out the taste of the dishes to the extreme. Her mind was immersed in cooking. Suddenly, in the distance, there was a burst of exclamation. The onlookers seemed to have seen something incredible. Chef Jing Yuan was also slightly stunned. She subconsciously raised her head and looked into the distance. There, Bu Fang also began to cook. However, Bu Fang's cooking was very simple. Swish! They saw Bu Fang take out a wooden barrel. The wooden barrel was opened, and suddenly, a strong milk fragrance filled the air. This milk fragrance had a mellow taste, and there was a faint, unique fluctuation. This fluctuation spread. It made Qi Si and the others, who were calm and unruffled, change their expressions. This fluctuation reminded them of the bursting meatballs and perishing pot that Bu Fang had previously displayed. What did this man want to do? Did he want to make another explosion? They all straightened their backs and stared at the scene seriously. Bu Fang snapped his fingers. Suddenly, the Black Turtle Constellation Wok appeared. He placed the Black Turtle Constellation Wok on the stove. Bu Fang opened his mouth, and a white flame suddenly sprang out. As soon as this flame appeared, the temperature of the whole world seemed to change. Terrifying fluctuations spread out. When Chef Jing Yuan saw this flame, her eyes suddenly shrank. This kind of hot flame, it was the first time she saw it. In her spiritual perception, this kind of flame was incomparably violent. Sizzle! Hot air rose from the Black Turtle Constellation Wok. Bu Fang reached out his hand, and after checking the temperature, He poured the milk into the wok. The milky white milk poured down like a straight waterfall. The silky milk made many people exclaim. Many people were intoxicated by the milky fragrance that spread in the air. Chef Jing Yuan gritted her teeth. She didn't know what Bufang was going to cook, but she knew that she needed to concentrate on cooking her own dishes. With a thought, Chef Jing Yuan put her hands together. Nether energy continued to condense, and soon, a black flame burst out from her palm. She didn't have an immortal flame, but she had the palm flame. This was also a very hot flame. In terms of temperature, although it was not as hot as Bufang's immortal flame, it was a flame condensed from the nether energy in her body, so it was easier to control. Boom! The flame drilled into the stove. Chef Jing Yuan put aside all distracting thoughts and began to cook. On the other side, Bufang's strange cooking attracted the attention of almost everyone present. In the black turtle constellation wok, a gurgling sound rang out. That was the milk that was poured into it began to boil. The milk bubbles burst, and a fragrant smell constantly rose from it. While boiling the milk, Bufang began to move on the other side. He took out an egg. This was an 8-star beast emperor's spirit beast egg, which he had obtained in the Heaven Chief realm. The quality of the egg was very high, and Bufang needed this kind of spirit beast egg. Originally, the best choice would have been a phoenix egg. However, a phoenix egg could only be found by chance. There was only one, and it was used by Bufang. Now, even if Bufang wanted a phoenix egg, he couldn't find it. He took out 2 blue and white porcelain bowls. This 8-star beast emperor's spirit beast egg wasn't very big. It was about the size of 3 palms. Bufang gently patted the spirit beast egg. Instantly, the spirit beast egg soared up into the sky. Under the support of Bufang's true energy, it suddenly fell. With a crack, it hit the side of the blue and white porcelain bowl, and the eggshell cracked. Opening the eggshell, Bufang carefully separated the egg yolk and the white. This process wasn't difficult for Bufang. However, many of the people present were baffled by what they saw. Was this man cooking? This strange way of cooking really made people speechless. His hand formed a small array. Inside the array, light flashed. Then, Bufang let out a soft cry. Xiaopi! A jet of golden light dashed out, flashing around Bufang's body. It seemed to have turned into a golden shuttle. Letting Xiaopi enter the egg white, Bufang took out the crystal sugar he had made in the heaven and earth farmland, asking Xiaopi to beat the egg white. After beating the egg white, he beat the egg yolk. Xiaopi had a strange energy that could enhance the taste of the ingredients. This was very important to this dish. A moment later, Bufang's eyes turned to the pot. The milk in the pot was still boiling, and it was a little sticky. He removed the layer of milk membrane and poured the slightly viscous milk into a bowl. After cooling it for a while, he was ready to start the next step. On the other side, Xiaopi, who was happily swimming in the blue and white porcelain bowl, was taken out by Bufang. The egg white and the egg yolk were almost beaten, and the juice had some bubbles. Bufang poured the cooled milk into the beaten egg white. Then, he asked Shrimpy to continue stirring the egg white. The milk and egg white were mixed together. After stirring for a long time, the juice became thicker. After the mixture was evenly mixed, Bufang poured the egg yolk into the mixture and allowed Shrimpy to continue stirring it. Shrimpy seemed to enjoy this feeling very much. It tossed and turned in the water, its compound eyes rolling around. On its body, there was a faint golden brilliance constantly spreading out, turning into a formless energy that continuously fused with Shrimpy. This caused the thick liquid to shine with a bright light. Bufang took Xiaopi out, putting it on his shoulder. Xiaopi's body was spotless, blinking its compound eyes. As for the juice, Bufang gently exhaled, preparing to start the critical treatment. Freezing treatment. Bufang didn't choose to use a refrigerator, although the system would provide it. However, Bufang had a bolder idea. He planned to use his cultivation base to empty the air around the juice, creating a freezing effect. Moreover, he could control the freezing temperature according to Bu Fang's mind to achieve the best effect. A dragon roared and a sparrow cried. Bu Fang's spirit sea surged, and his mental energy surged out. It seemed to turn into a big hand, covering the blue and white porcelain bowl. Ice crystals began to form around the blue and white porcelain bowl. Bu Fang's eyes were fixed on the juice. In the distance, the surrounding people were puzzled by Bu Fang's cooking. There was no rich aroma as they had imagined, only the milk fragrance from the previously boiled milk. However, the milk fragrance could not reflect Bu Fang's cooking skills. Many people were a little suspicious of Bu Fang at this moment. Did this guy really know how to cook? On the other side, Chef Jing Yuan's cooking had come to an end. The fire soared to the sky, and the hot flames continued to erupt. The rich aroma of the dish lingered from it. Sizzle. Everyone could even hear the sound of the oil splashing. Everyone nodded. This was cooking. That man's cooking wasn't cooking at all. Could that thing be eaten? Many people snorted. Suddenly, someone's eyes narrowed, looking over in confusion. They only found that above Bu Fang's head, there were black clouds emerging. How could there be black clouds underground? Everyone was dumbfounded. It wasn't just them. Even Qi Si and the other generals were slightly stunned. The next moment, in the black clouds, there was a thunderous sound. It resounded throughout Goddess City. Bu Fang looked up at the lightning punishment, the corners of his mouth slightly twitching. Bu Fang's secret handmade ice cream was finally going to be completed. Chapter 1132. Rumble. As soon as the sound of thunder rang out, the entire Goddess City panicked. Goddess City was located underground, so how could there be thunder? How many years had it been since they had heard thunder? The onlookers all raised their heads, and their faces were full of fear. They thought that the end of the world had come. Chef Jing Yuan was also stunned. She raised her head and looked at the void. Looking at the dark clouds gathering in the sky above the ground, her heart couldn't help but tremble. What's going on? Chef Jing Yuan's eyes narrowed. A moment later, she looked at Bu Fang in the distance. Seeing Bu Fang's calm appearance, her face couldn't help but change. Could it be that the dish had caused the thunder? If that was the case, that dish. How extraordinary would it be? Qi Si, Dami Hayashi, and the others also narrowed their eyes. They looked at the lightning punishment in the sky, frowning. Naturally, Bu Fang was no stranger to lightning punishment. In the Heaven Chief realm, basically every time he cooked a dish, he would trigger a lightning punishment. This was the test and tribulation that the Heaven Chief had to endure. Just like the fragrance of plum blossoms came from the bitter cold, if a dish wanted to be sublimated, it also had to go through tempering and the baptism of lightning. Buzz, the next moment, an array flashed and appeared beside him. A moment later, Xiao Bai's figure shot up into the sky. Its mechanical eyes flashed. After summoning Whitey, Bu Fang did not make any further movements. His gaze once again landed on the ice cream, which had already solidified into a solid form. Ice cream. In his previous life, Bu Fang was no stranger to this delicacy. The real top ice cream, whether it was the materials used or the production process, was very exquisite. A true master of ice cream would have an inhuman level of control over every single detail. As for the temperature, Bu Fang personally used his true energy and mental force to control it. This way, the taste of the ice cream would reach the best state. In the blue and white porcelain bowl, the ice cream had successfully solidified. A gust of cold air circulated around it. The fragrance was not strong, but one could smell a slight milky aroma. Bolts of lightning continued to descend. Whitey soared into the sky to block the lightning bolts, and they were quickly devoured. This time, it was the fourth lightning tribulation, which was of a standard degree. It was not difficult for Xiao Bai to resist it. After swallowing the thunder punishment, Xiao Bai stood behind Bu Fang as if he was drunk. Lightning flashed in the mechanical eyes. The dark clouds in the sky slowly dispersed. The shadow that shrouded the hearts of every woman in Goddess City finally disappeared. Many people understood that the lightning punishment was truly caused by that man. Cooking a dish could actually trigger a lightning punishment? There was such a thing. Many people sucked in a breath of cold air, their eyes filled with curiosity. Originally, they all thought that Bufang's dishes were nothing special, but the appearance of thunder changed their minds. A dish that could trigger a lightning punishment was definitely not ordinary. Buzz, a strong aroma seemed to spurt out from the vortex, turning into a whirlwind that soared up into the sky. Chef Jing Yuan's cooking had finally ended. As the boiling hot oil poured down, a sizzling sound could be heard. Under this pouring, the aroma seemed to be sublimated to the extreme, bursting out completely. Smelling this aroma, Bufang couldn't help but be a little surprised. This aroma was really good. It didn't seem to come from a dish that hadn't crossed the tribulation yet. To be honest, this woman's cooking level was really good. It was a dish that was stacked like a small tower, which was overflowing with colors. The ingredients were fried, stacked together, and then poured with the soup and hot oil, which made it look like it was bursting with a golden brilliance, which was quite eye-catching. It was a gorgeous dish. However, Bufang just glanced at it, then retracted his gaze. Chef Jing Yuan's cooking skills were not bad. However, in Bufang's eyes it was just not bad. Hell's Goddess City, after all, wasn't the Heaven Chief realm. How could there be so many top Heaven Chief chefs? Chef Jing Yuan's cooking level was still a little bit away from the Heaven Chief realm. However, her foundation was very good, and she even had the embryonic form of the heart of cooking path. It wasn't easy. Without staying in the Heaven Chief realm, it was hard to understand the difficulty of condensing the heart of cooking path. The Heaven Chief realm only had a systematic way of cultivating chefs, so the chef's cooking skills were very high. Chef Jing Yuan's innate talent was actually not bad. However, because of the environment, her cooking skills could only reach this level. Bufang glanced at Jing Yuan, his face expressionless. A moment later, he reached out his hand, patting the stove. Boom! A loud explosion sounded. This caused many people to jump up in shock. Everyone's eyes gathered on Bufang. Beams of light shot out from the frozen ice cream. The beams of light had 7 colors. It was the light that Bufang had emitted after he had controlled the temperature to reach the best. Cold air lingered, accompanied by sparkling immortal energy. It looked like a beautiful work of art. A piece of ice crystal so beautiful that it could enchant people's hearts. Buzz Bufang's hand shook. A wisp of green smoke twirled. A moment later, the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand. The dragon roar was ear-piercing. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in his hand. Knife light shot out. Then, streaks of blade light fell like meteors. Everybody was dumbstruck, looking at him. They held their breaths, not daring to breathe loudly. The moment Bufang used his knife skill, they were shocked to find that in front of them, there seemed to be a vast starry sky. Streaks of meteors slid down from the starry sky and fell down. In the starry sky, the stars were dazzling. One by one, 7 connected, forming a shocking picture in the sky. They didn't dare to imagine such a situation. The meteor knife skill and the Big Dipper carving skill. These were the skills that were deeply engraved in Bufang's memory. Almost subconsciously, he unleashed it. The dragon bone kitchen knife began to process and carve the ice cream. The 7-colored light was dim, and sometimes it disappeared. The people around couldn't help but exclaim. Soon, the carved ice cream slowly floated down from the white tiger stove. Bufang turned his hand. 3 blue and white porcelain bowls spun in his hand, then he placed them on the ground. Instantly, the ice cream fell, falling into the blue and white porcelain bowls. Then, the 3 bowls of ice cream were finished. The first bowl of ice cream was like a blooming rose. The petals weren't thin, but they were thick. When they curved, they presented a beautiful curve. The second bowl of ice cream was a flying Luan bird. The wings of the Luan bird had been sculpted in an extremely lifelike manner, as if it were really going to come to life and spread its wings. For the third bowl of ice cream, Bufang carved a charmingly naive little bear. The bear squinted its eyes, sitting in the porcelain bowl. It looked simple and cute. When the 3 bowls of ice cream appeared, all the women present were dumbfounded. They didn't expect that Bufang could make such a dish. The ice cream had a 7-colored luster, and as soon as it appeared, it completely attracted their gazes, making them unable to move their eyes away. So beautiful! So cute! Can this thing be eaten? It looks so exquisite! I didn't expect that a dish could be made like this. It feels like my view of the world has been refreshed. The surrounding crowd instantly burst into an uproar. It didn't have a fragrance, but its appearance alone had captured the hearts of all the women present. Chef Jing Yuan looked at the dish Bufang had finished cooking, dumbfounded. This was a dish? A dish made of ice? It looked so cute, as if it had magic. Chef Jing Yuan couldn't help but think she suddenly lost all confidence in her dishes. Bufang used a clean white cloth to wipe away the impurities around the blue and white porcelain bowl. Then, he took out a white handkerchief and placed it under the bowl. With a shake of his hand, a small spoon made of silver was placed on top of the white handkerchief. Then, Bufang took a step back, gently exhaling. He clasped his hands together, calmly saying, "Secret handmade ice cream, done." As soon as he said that, the crowd cheered. Although they didn't know what these women were cheering for, in the distance, on the spirit gold throne, the female King Biluo craned her neck, which was as slender as a swan's. She squinted her eyes at the 3 bowls of ice cream that Bufang had placed on the stove, a dumbfounded look on her face. "Sister Yu, what dish did this little chef make? How come I have never seen such a cute dish?" The female King Biluo asked, puzzled. Yu was also a little dazed. It was her first time seeing Bufang make such a dish. She had never eaten it before, so she didn't know how to answer. "Can this thing be eaten? It's something that can only be seen but not eaten." "Don't even think about winning against Jing Yuan," the female King Biluo said. Yu glanced at the female King Biluo, then said, "Bufang's dishes are always unexpected. Have you heard of spicy strips? Do you know about hot pot? And the super delicious spicy blood lobster, have you ever eaten it?" Yu smacked her lips, naming the dishes one by one. This stunned the female King Biluo. It all sounded so weird. Spicy strips? What was that? Hot pot? A pot made of fire? Spicy blood lobster? Not bad. Gulp. Thinking about that, the female King Biluo couldn't help but swallow her saliva. "All right. I'll reluctantly believe you," the female King Biluo said. "Sister Biluo, you have to remember our bet," Yu said. "Don't worry, I have never lost a bet." The female King Biluo wrinkled her nose and snorted. Bufang's mind moved, causing the 3 dishes to float around him. Carrying the 3 dishes, he walked in front of Qi Si and the others. Bufang looked at them indifferently. 3 bowls of ice cream, each of you choose one." Bufang looked at the 3 of them, his face expressionless as he said. Each of the 3 bowls of ice cream had a different shape. Different shapes represented different tastes. They could even choose by themselves? Qi Si and the others looked at each other, seeing the surprise in each other's eyes. Then, they all nodded their heads. Qi Si's white finger touched her red lips, looking at the 3 ice creams spinning around Bufang, and her eyes slightly lit up. "I choose the rose," Qi Si said. Bufang nodded. Then, with a thought, the bowl of ice cream, which was carved with a delicate rose, floated in front of Qi Si. Then, Bufang turned his head to look at Dami Hayashi. "I choose the big bear." Dami Hayashi's wheat-colored skin flashed, and she grinned. Bufang nodded, and the ice cream carved with a big bear also floated over. Heimu, the general of Heilongjiang, naturally could only eat the ice cream carved with a phoenix, although the latter was not picky. Chef Jing Yuan placed his dish in the distance, frowning at Bufang. She bit her red lips, staring at Chi-Si and the others, who were preparing to taste the ice cream. In the distance, every onlooker stretched their heads and squinted their eyes. Although the appearance of the ice cream captivated them, they did not know how it would taste. If it only looked good but did not have the taste, then it would definitely not be a good food. Not only the onlookers were watching. Empress Bai Luo and Yu, as well as Hades' Era, who was holding a spicy strip in his mouth, could not help but stare. Chi-Si's delicate hand grabbed the small silver spoon, and her little finger slightly tilted up. She glanced at Bufang, then pinched the silver spoon and gently scooped the rose ice cream. The silver spoon touched the ice cream and instantly sank. The soft ice cream made Chi-Si's eyes slightly brighten, and the mellow fragrance of milk suddenly burst out. Lifting the silver spoon, she scooped the ice cream into her mouth. Her red lips pursed, and her little tongue licked the silver spoon. In the next moment, Chi-Si's eyes suddenly froze. On the other side, Dami Hayashi also scooped up a spoonful of ice cream and put it into her mouth. Heimu was very calm, and her movements were neither fast nor slow. However, the moment they tasted the ice cream, the movements of the three of them froze. A beep sounded. The three of them almost simultaneously pulled out the silver spoon from their mouth. A misty look appeared on Chi-Si's face. Dami Hayashi's cheeks were red. Holding the silver spoon, her eyes misty, she grinned. This ice cream touched this old man's maiden heart. Chapter 1133. Was the ice cream delicious? From the way the three generals ate a mouthful of ice cream, it could be seen. It was as if they were drunk, which made the people around them feel very magical. It was beautiful and delicious. Was it ice cream? Chi-Si narrowed her eyes, and a misty expression appeared on her white face. She was feeling the taste of the ice cream melting in her mouth. The moment the mouthful of ice cream entered her mouth, it was as cold as a silver spoon. That cold sensation seemed to have instantly absorbed all of the turbid air and hot air in her mouth, and a refreshing feeling instantly spread throughout her entire body. That feeling could only be described with one word: awesome. The ice cream wrapped around the silver spoon had also become ice cold, and when it came into contact with her supple red lips, the sensitivity of her lips and skin was unleashed to the extreme, as if a bolt of electricity had instantly spread throughout her entire body. Of course, the most important thing was the taste. If you wanted to eat something cold, eating ice cubes was the same. However, this ice cream was not ice cubes, or it could be said that it was different from ice cubes. The milky taste filled her mouth, so mellow that it made people drunk. Inadvertently, a blush appeared on her cheeks, as if she was shy when she tasted something good for the first time. That delicious taste instantly spread, making people tremble. With the smooth, milky taste, it had the refreshing feeling of ice crystals. Chi-Si narrowed her eyes, and her long eyelashes trembled. At that moment, the fire that the general of the Red Dragon Army had been controlling seemed to have been extinguished without him noticing. She exhaled softly. The corners of her mouth curled up, revealing a charming smile. She opened her eyes, and there was an indescribable emotion in them. That emotion had not appeared on Chi-Si's face for a long time. Since she grew up, the smile on her face had been constantly disappearing. Now, all that was left of her was an indescribable majesty and killing intent. After eating a mouthful of ice cream, Chi-Si's heart instantly softened. The ice crystals that encased his heart seemed to melt along with the ice cream in his mouth, melting away like snow. Using the silver spoon, she once again carefully scooped a spoonful of ice cream into her mouth. The milky fragrance was mellow, and it was so delicious that her body and mind relaxed. Just like what Dami Hayashi had just shouted. It was as if there was an electric current that stimulated the girl's heart that had been silent for a long time. Chi-Si smiled, the corners of her mouth rose, her eyes narrowed, revealing a happy smile. This kind of food that could make people laugh heartily was really inconceivable. After eating this delicacy, it was as if his emotions were no longer under his control. As she continued to eat, she scooped up the rose petals and stuffed them into her mouth. The cool texture, the sweet taste, and the rich milky fragrance, the three instantly mixed together. Delicious, Chisi murmured. On the other side, Dami Hayashi had already gone crazy. This kind of delicacy, this kind of taste, this kind of food that could stimulate her girlish heart was hard to come by. It was driving her crazy. She did not want to eat as elegantly as Chisi. She was, in fact, a commoner. Therefore, she didn't even need a silver spoon. She grabbed the blue and white porcelain bowl and started to eat heartily. His mouth was filled with the juice of the melted ice cream. She stuck out her tongue and licked it without any care for her image. Her eyes immediately burst forth with resplendent brilliance. Wahahaha! It's so delicious! Dami Hayashi was so excited that she couldn't help but laugh. This was very in line with her character. She would go crazy if she didn't like it. On the other side, a general who did not have the stunning beauty of Chisi and Dami Hayashi was silently eating ice cream. Her movements were not very big, and it could even be said that she was not conspicuous at all, although she had a tall and sturdy figure. But when she ate the ice cream, she was very careful. It could be seen that her character should also be very careful. Eating and eating, that Hei Mu's eyes suddenly became red. The more she ate, the more her eyes seemed to have a flood that was about to burst out. Finally, she couldn't help it anymore. Tears flowing down her cheek. With a plop, like a broken string of pearls, they fell to the ground. This bowl of ice cream touched her soft and tender heart, and a myriad of emotions welled up in her heart. She felt as if she were reminiscing about her teenage years. That was her innocent and beautiful time. The crowd below was already stunned by what they saw. Eating a bowl of ice cream, the three generals actually showed such exaggerated expressions. Could it be that this ice cream was really so magical? Everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. In the next moment, everyone's heart burned with passion. Their eyes stared at the three generals, and their hearts couldn't help but tremble. Looking at them constantly scooping ice cream into their mouths, it was as if there was some kind of magic that made their hearts become incomparably eager. This was a desire that was difficult to suppress. Even Chef Jing Yuan felt a little itchy in her heart. Slurp slurp, a shameless licking sound rang out. Everyone's eyes focused on it. They saw General Dami Hayashi holding that blue and white porcelain bowl, sticking out her tongue and licking the bowl non-stop. F***ck. Dami Hayashi's eyes suddenly lit up. The feeling of licking is even better, Dami Hayashi exclaimed. Chisi and Hei Mu were stunned. Almost subconsciously, they held the blue and white porcelain bowl and licked it. Their tongues rubbed against the ice cream, and the cold feeling instantly burst forth. The tip of their tongues touched the ice cream, and the sweet taste and milky fragrance suddenly burst forth. Chisi and Hei Mu's eyes also shrank. It's true. So magical. The two of them smiled in surprise. Then, they abandoned the silver spoon and began to seriously lick the blue and white porcelain bowl. The taste seeped into their hearts, making them extremely happy. The memories of their youth constantly surged out from the depths of their memories. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back, looking at the three of them eating. He wasn't surprised. Of course, his original intention was not to let the three of them lick the ice cream, but they actually learned it without a teacher. It seemed that in the face of ice cream, women's subconscious reaction was to lick it. Bufang originally wanted to develop some other types of ice cream in the future. Today's ice cream could only be said to be the original flavor. If he could add the taste of other immortal fruits, it would definitely be more delicious. Of course, this required Bufang's subsequent efforts to research. Bufang thought about it. In a place like Goddess City, if he could open an ice cream shop, business would definitely be booming. Compared to Spring Breeze Pavilion, The ability to make money would definitely not be inferior. Bufang rubbed his chin. Suddenly, just as this thought flashed past his mind. In his mind, the system's serious voice rang out. Temporary mission triggered. Before the host enters God Vanishing Mountain, please open an ice cream shop in Goddess City and teach the chef apprentices to learn at least 3 ways to make ice cream. Temporary mission reward. Gourmet array, imprisonment. Bufang was stunned. He didn't think that the system would actually speak at this time and even issue a temporary mission. Open a shop in Goddess City? And it was an ice cream shop at that? Ice cream shops did not only have ice cream, but also many other ice-type delicacies, such as ice cream cones, popsicles, iced milk tea, and so on. How could Bufang have so much time to do these things? He furrowed his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. And this time, the temporary mission reward was actually a gourmet array. He had already awakened 3 gourmet arrays, and this would be the 4th. The first 3 gourmet arrays, according to their functions, were enhancement, explosion, and defense. Now, with the addition of this array, imprisonment. Bufang narrowed his eyes. This effect should be very good. With the enhancement of the gourmet array, Bufang made a rampage ramen. As for the explosion array, Bufang made a perishing pot and an explosive meatball. As for the defense, Bufang had not yet added it to the gourmet array. However, for the invincible Bufang with the vermilion robe, the defense of this gourmet array was basically useless, so Bufang did not use it much. Forget it. Let's not think about this for now. Bufang's main goal now was to win this cooking competition. Of course, judging from the current situation, Bufang had basically stabilized. Chef Jing Yuan herself was attracted by Bufang's ice cream. There was no doubt about the outcome of the competition. Wush Qi-si, Dami Hayashi, and the other 2 generals finally finished eating their ice cream. They even licked the blue and white porcelain bowl clean. After eating, they put down their bowls and let out a long breath. That kind of comfortable feeling, that kind of joy was simply indescribable. The surrounding crowd had long been salivating. They also wanted to taste the delicious taste of the ice cream. It wasn't just them. Even the female King Biluo, who was sitting on the spirit gold throne and watching the 3 generals eat their ice cream, couldn't help but feel a little impatient. Her flaming red lips parted, a little impatient. Fortunately, she still cared about her face and didn't go out. Moreover, the female King Biluo also thought that since Bufang had made this dish, he would naturally take it out during the imperial feast. At that time, she could have a good taste. But soon, a bitter expression appeared on her face again. She really wanted to eat it now. Whether it was the female King Biluo or you, they both pursed their lips. After eating their ice cream, the 3 generals rested for a while. Then, Chef Jing Yuan's dish was served. That brilliant dish, which was steaming hot, was reflected in the eyes of the 3 generals. The color and aroma were not bad, and the 3 of them also had a little appetite. However, after tasting it, the 3 of them, who usually thought that Chef Jing Yuan's dishes were very delicious, didn't show any enthusiasm. Their emotions didn't fluctuate much. Chef Jing Yuan saw the 3 of them after eating the dish, and she understood that she had already lost. Completely lost. Moreover, it was a kind of crushing defeat. This kind of defeat was really difficult for her to accept. Her mood was a little depressed. This was the first time she tasted defeat, and it made Chef Jing Yuan want to cry. Chef Jing Yuan's dishes are also very delicious. However, they don't give me the feeling of being moved. They just become a little ordinary, Qi-si thought for a moment and said. She wanted to comfort Jing Yuan. However, after thinking about it, she could only say such a sentence. Indeed, compared with ice cream, this dish was really ordinary. Chef Jing Yuan pursed her lips, and her eyes quickly turned red. She lost. The onlookers below also couldn't help but be silent. They didn't know what to say. Their goddess city's most powerful chef actually lost to a male chef. Silence was the best way now. Isn't it normal for you to lose? You haven't condensed the heart of cooking path, which means that you still have some doubts about your own path. You don't know if you can really walk this path. Suddenly, just as Chef Jingyuan was about to cry, Bufang opened his mouth. His words were sharp, and there was not a hint of sympathy in them. Jingyuan was stunned, and she couldn't help but raise her head. Just when everyone thought that Bufang was going to ridicule her, the crowd suddenly saw that Bufang had walked to the remaining ice cream, dug out 2 ice balls, and put them into the blue and white porcelain bowl. With a flick of his finger, that blue and white porcelain bowl flew toward Jingyuan. Jingyuan was stunned, and the surrounding people were also stunned. Then, everyone revealed a look of jealousy and madness. Ice cream! They also wanted to eat it. Jingyuan took the ice cream that Bufang handed over. She raised her head and looked at Bufang, her eyes a little puzzled. Have a bite, maybe there will be a surprise? Bufang looked at Jingyuan, the corners of his mouth twitching. Jingyuan furrowed her brows, as though she understood Bufang's meaning. Bufang said that her heart of cooking path hadn't condensed yet, and she knew it clearly. Because when she was cooking, sometimes she would feel lost. Taking a deep breath, she emptied her mind. Jingyuan grabbed the silver spoon in the porcelain bowl. She dug a small spoonful of ice cream, then carefully put it into her mouth. As soon as it entered her mouth, Jingyuan's eyes suddenly changed. Chapter 1134. Jingyuan had never thought that there would be such a delicious thing. This kind of deliciousness was completely different from the deliciousness of the dishes. The ice-cold feeling that entered her mouth instantly spread throughout her entire body. The smooth texture, the rich milky fragrance, and the unique flavor that permeated the air caused her to be completely stunned. Why is it so delicious? Jingyuan held the blue and white porcelain bowl, holding the silver spoon in her mouth. Her whole person was stunned on the spot. Her gaze became a little complicated. After taking a bite of Bufang's dish, she understood why Qi Si and the others said that her dishes had become ordinary. In fact, compared to this dish, her dishes were indeed very ordinary. There was no breathtaking taste, nor was there a deep impression. An ordinary dish was the one that caused her to fail. But she had worked very hard. For cooking dishes, she had spent all her effort, and she had done the best she could. But the result was still the same. She lost. With her level, she was indeed not qualified to continue cooking for Her Majesty the Queen. Holding the blue and white porcelain bowl, she used the silver spoon to scoop another spoonful of ice cream ball and put it in her mouth. The smell of the melted ice cream caused tears to fall from Jingyuan's eyes. Although Bufang's ice cream ball was not decorated with any carvings, even if it was just an ice cream ball, Jingyuan could taste the deliciousness contained in it. It also let her know the gap between her and Bufang. When Qi Si saw that Jingyuan was actually crying, she suddenly panicked. Dami Hayashi and Hei Mu also couldn't help but stand up. Their faces had a complicated look. On one side was the glory of Goddess City's chef, and on the other side was Bufang, who cooked a delicious ice cream dish. Jingyuan was crying, and they didn't know what to say. Bufang looked at Jingyuan. His eyes were indifferent. Is it delicious? Bufang asked. Jingyuan's eyes and nose were red as she ate the ice cream ball. She softly nodded and nodded. He would be lying if he said it wasn't delicious. Jingyuan didn't know what to say. In reality, this ice cream had truly exceeded her expectations. She felt as if she had just taken a bite of it, and she was reminded of the innocent and beautiful times when she had first begun to learn cooking. Then don't cry. You should be happy eating delicious food. Bufang looked at Jingyuan and said. Jingyuan took a deep breath, then looked at Bufang. You said that I can't condense my heart of cooking path. Can you tell me how to condense it? Jingyuan said. At this moment, she was already asking Bufang with the attitude of seeking knowledge. No one said a word. Chef Jingyuan's failure had left many of them in a daze. The heart of cooking path is your understanding of cooking. There are thousands of cooking paths. If you want to walk on that path, you need to have a firm direction. You have been stagnant because you haven't found your own path. Your goal is to become the head chef of the imperial feast, but once you don't have this goal, you will be lost. You can only cook dishes aimlessly, and those dishes will lack the essence and obsession. Bu Fang said. Chi-Si pursed her red lips, looking at Bu Fang thoughtfully. Dami Hayashi was confused. Many people around also didn't understand. Of course, it didn't matter whether they understood or not. The important thing was that Jing Yuan could understand. Jing Yuan's eyes were confused for a while, then slowly became firm. Looking at her appearance, Bu Fang couldn't help but slightly raise the corner of his mouth. Tell me, what do you think the direction of your cooking path is? Bu Fang looked at Jing Yuan, slowly saying. Jing Yuan stared blankly. She glanced at her surroundings before lowering her head to look at the 2 balls of ice cream in the porcelain bowl. The moment she took a bite of the ice cream, the feeling of happiness that rose from the depths of her heart caused her gaze to gradually become resolute. She held the porcelain bowl tightly with both hands, took a deep breath, and looked at Bu Fang. I want to learn how to make ice cream, Jing Yuan looked at Bu Fang, sincerely saying. She seemed to be afraid that Bu Fang would be unhappy, so she was a little cautious. The other party's answer didn't seem to be beyond Bu Fang's expectations. Any female chef, after tasting the delicious taste of ice cream, would want to learn how to make it. Jing Yuan should also understand that if Bu Fang left Goddess City, this kind of delicious food would disappear. The disappearance of this kind of delicious food was a disaster for Goddess City. With just a bite of ice cream, Jing Yuan deeply fell in love with this delicious taste. She felt that she must learn how to make ice cream. If you want to learn, you can be my apprentice chef. Bu Fang raised the corner of his mouth, clasped his hands, and looked at Jing Yuan. Jing Yuan was stunned. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. Bu Fang didn't refuse? Chi-Si's brows furrowed tightly. She looked at Bu Fang, seemingly a little dissatisfied. Jing Yuan was the chef of Spring Breeze Pavilion. How could she become a man's apprentice chef? This kind of thing, I agree. Jing Yuan's voice was incomparably firm. This made Chi-Si's pupils shrink, and she looked at her in disbelief. How could it be? How could Jing Yuan agree to such a request? I agree to be your apprentice chef. I want to learn how to make ice cream, Jing Yuan said seriously. After Jing Yuan finished speaking, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The aura on her body suddenly changed, becoming even more condensed. The sound of a heartbeat rang out. It was as if it had burst forth from ancient times. The heart of cooking path had solidified. At this moment, Jing Yuan's aura seemed to have undergone an earth-shaking change. At this moment, Jing Yuan had become the Heaven Chief. The only thing she lacked was a firm belief. Very well, in that case you will follow me to learn cooking. However, the main thing now is to complete the imperial feast, Bu Fang said. Without a doubt, in this cooking competition, Bu Fang won and obtained the qualification to cook for the imperial feast. Although Jing Yuan lost, she would still be Bu Fang's assistant and complete the imperial feast cooking together. The surrounding people looked at Bu Fang with a somewhat complicated gaze. Of course, they were curious about the taste of the ice cream. It was a pity that as the audience, they did not have the chance to taste the delicacy that moved the 3 generals. Bu Fang put away the white tiger stove and tidied up the kitchen utensils. The vermilion robe on his body fluttered. Then, he looked at Jing Yuan. Now, take me to the kitchen where the imperial feast is cooked, Bu Fang said. Jing Yuan, who was at the side, quickly stuffed the ice cream into her mouth. Her face was red as she ate. Seeing that Bu Fang had asked her, she raised her head and came back to her senses. The crowd dispersed. The 3 generals were also relatively busy, so they left separately. Chi-Si summoned the red dragon and rode on it. In a short while, they disappeared into the horizon. Dami Hayashi summoned the green dragon, and Hei-Mu summoned the black dragon. The departure of the three generals signified the end of the imperial feast competition that was not considered to be very intense. Everyone left. Only Jing Yuan and Bu Fang, who had finished their ice cream, were left. Head Chef Bu, please follow me, Jing Yuan said seriously to Bu Fang. Then, she brought Bu Fang around the dragon lake and walked toward the palace. Ah! She lost just like that? Jing Yuan, that lass, admitted defeat so easily? The female King Biluo looked at the end of the cooking competition with a dumbfounded face. The ice cream was not late, and it seemed that she had lost the bet. Yu crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at her. The female King Biluo smiled awkwardly. Seeing Yu's expression, she suddenly felt playful. She pinched Yu's head and rubbed it against her chest. If I lost, I lost. Isn't it just agreeing to Sister Yu's request? What is Sister afraid of? The female King Biluo said with a smile. Then, she brought Yu and flew toward the palace. This time, she was suddenly looking forward to seeing how the imperial feast cooked by Bu Fang would turn out. To be able to win against Jing Yuan, it meant that Bu Fang's cooking skills were not bad. If it was a delicacy like ice cream, this time's imperial feast would be exciting. Goddess City, Sacrificial Sect Manor. The high priestess sat cross-legged on a praying mat. Not far from her was an incense burner, from which light blue smoke slowly diffused. That smoke had a unique fragrance. Smelling it, one's spirit would be slightly relaxed, and their entire body would feel much more comfortable. Wei Jin pushed open the door to the room, slowly walking in from outside. She had already put on the loose robe once again. She no longer had the feeling of being stripped by Nether King Erha, and she had regained her composure. Is the competition over? The high priestess did not wait for Wei Jin to speak. She raised her eyes and said. This high priestess's face was plain, without any makeup. She looked simple and beautiful. At this moment, she was holding a wooden comb, combing her long hair. It's over. That man won, Wei Jin said. She had also watched that cooking competition. The appearance of ice cream made her very curious, and she even wanted to eat it. However, thinking of her mission, she endured it. Oh, it's not out of my expectations. The high priestess nodded, not saying anything. She placed the wooden comb down, placing it into the dressing box at the side. The high priestess's eyes stared at the incense burner. Some time ago, I deduced a prophecy. The high priestess's voice was very gentle. Wei Jin froze, her heart suddenly trembling. The high priestess's prophecy? That prophecy said that Goddess City will appear soon, and a big thing will happen in the God Vanishing Mountains Forbidden Land. To Goddess City, it's hard to judge whether it's a blessing or a curse. The high priestess said softly. Wei Jin's body trembled even more violently. Goddess City will appear? Goddess City was a forbidden land force in the God Vanishing Mountain, and there was an agreement that it could not appear. Why would the high priestess make such a prophecy? Moreover, this prophecy was hard to predict. High priestess, should we report to Her Majesty and tell her about this prophecy? Wei Jin felt her teeth chattering, and her entire body seemed to be shrouded in a wave of coldness. What are you afraid of? No one can destroy Goddess City. As long as the Forbidden Land exists, even if the Nether Prison's army invades, Goddess City will be safe and sound. The high priestess chuckled. That smile was like 100 flowers blooming, extremely brilliant. As for Her Majesty, this high priestess will naturally tell her. However, now is not the time. Wait until the imperial feast is over. Don't disturb Her Majesty's mood, the high priestess said. After saying that, she opened the lid of the incense burner, using a small spoon to scoop up some light blue crystalline powder, and poured it into the incense burner. Light blue smoke once again spread out. Goddess City, Imperial Palace Kitchen. The Imperial Palace's kitchen was bustling with activity. Women came and went, unceasingly processing the ingredient. Jing Yuan brought Bu Fang into the kitchen. After walking around the chaotic crowd, they finally came to a quiet place. The imperial feast is different from ordinary banquets. Every year, when the imperial feast is held, it is the happiest day of the year in Goddess City, Jing Yuan said. As for the imperial feast, the dishes and recipes are basically fixed. Other than a few dishes that can be changed according to the chef's wishes, the other dishes must be cooked strictly according to the recipes. This room has the recipes. Head chef Bu needs to master all the dishes in the recipes by tomorrow and tell us the names of the dishes that need to be changed so that we can prepare the ingredient. The imperial feast requires a total of 18 dishes. 3 of them are for the sacrificial ceremony, and the remaining 15 are for eating. The 3 sacrificial dishes are the set dishes of the sacrificial ceremony and cannot be changed. Jing Yuan said in a low voice. Bu Fang listened attentively. Since he had accepted the imperial feast, Bu Fang would naturally do his best. This was the integrity of a chef. A creaking sound rang out. The door was pushed open. Inside the door, the candlelight flickered quietly. As the door was pushed open, the flame flickered unceasingly. Bu Fang stepped inside. This was a small room with a table, a chair, and a pot of tea. On the table, there were 18 warm jade talismans. The jade talismans recorded the recipes. There was nothing else. When Jing Yuan saw Bu Fang enter, she bowed slightly and closed the door. She did not do anything else. She just quietly stood in front of the door, as if she was guarding it. In front of her was the busy imperial palace kitchen. The sounds of cooking, fire, and noise were unceasing. On the other side, after saying goodbye to Bu Fang, Hades' era held the spicy strip he had gotten from Bu Fang in his mouth, walking leisurely toward the imperial palace's main hall. As the Lord of Netherworld, it was time for him to meet the Empress of Goddess City. Chapter 1135. Actually, Goddess City was like a small country. The female King Biluo was the monarch of a country. The majestic palace was located in the center of Goddess City. After crossing the Dragon Lake, it was the main road to the palace. The road was paved with green bricks, which were extremely smooth. Walking to the stairs in front of the palace, the stairs were made of white jade. Stepping on it gave one a warm feeling. The handrails on both sides were also made of white jade. The sculptor's craftsmanship was superb, and the statues were vivid as if they were alive, spreading their wings and flying. Hades' era held the spicy strip in his mouth, walking forward. His robe was open, revealing his white chest. A playful smile hung at the corner of his mouth. At Nether King Ha's side, armored guards followed him from both sides, looking a little vigilant. Of course, Hades' era didn't care about that. Following the main road, he stepped on the stairs, heading toward the imperial palace. Shortly after, he entered the main hall of the imperial palace. With a loud bang, the door of the main hall suddenly closed. Hades' era narrowed his eyes, looking into the distance. There was a graceful figure reclining on the high platform. A lazy gaze shot out from that figure's body, directly falling on Hades' era's body. Hades' era held the spicy strip in his mouth, gently biting it. After biting off a piece, he continued to hold the spicy strip in his mouth. His gaze also rose, meeting the gaze of that lazy figure. Why didn't you become the Lord of the Netherworld? Why did you disguise yourself as a woman and sneak into Goddess City? The female King Biluo flipped and stood up. Her scarlet robe fluttered, raising a wave of fragrance. Looking at Hades' era, the female King Biluo instantly raised her red lips, asking playfully. Passing by, I came to find a friend, replied Hades' era with the spicy strip in his mouth. Friend? There isn't anyone in Goddess City who is the Lord of the Netherworld's friend. Oh, you mean that little chef? The female King Biluo narrowed her eyes. That's right. Sister, you're still so smart. Hades' era grinned. Don't talk nonsense. Are you sure you're not here for the god-vanishing mountain's spring of life like your dissolute father? King Biluo lifted her chin and looked at Hades' Era. Hades' Era walked around the hall and found a spot to lean against. Of course not. At that time, my father borrowed the spring of life to see if it could wash away the curse on Nethery. Of course, he also slept with your mother while he was at it. Nether King Erha shrugged, looking as though he was also very helpless. King Biluo snorted. His figure flickered, streaked across the void, and appeared in front of Hades' Era in an instant. His scarlet-red robe fluttered, and a terrifying pressure suddenly spread out. Hades' Era froze, and the spicy strip in his mouth trembled. Empress Biluo stretched out a finger. Her fingernail was painted red, and it was incomparably beautiful. She pointed at Hades' Era's glabella. It made Hades' Era take several steps back. He leaned against the wall. As the Lord of the Netherworld, why is your cultivation so weak? How can you bear the responsibility of the Lord of the Netherworld? The female King Biluo walked barefoot on the ice-cold floor of the palace. Hades' Era was not angry, chuckling with the spicy strip in his mouth. The female King Biluo of Goddess City was powerful. There was no doubt about it. After all, she had the god-vanishing mountain, a forbidden land in Earth prison. Of course, it was also because he, the Lord of the Netherworld, was weak. You are gluttonous and lazy. You have to be prepared for danger in times of peace. Nether prison is like a sharp spear hanging above hell. Who knows when it will poke a big hole in hell? Don't you feel it at all? The female King Biluo clasped her hands behind her back, looking at Hades' Era with a little disappointment. Her tone carried a little helplessness. Let's not talk about this. My friend needs to enter God-Vanishing Mountain to borrow the spring of life to water the Heaven Tree Seed. Heaven Chief Realm has already been invaded by Nether Prison, and the Heaven Tree is sleeping. It needs to be awakened by the Heaven Tree Seed. Otherwise, if the sacred level experts of Nether Prison break through the barrier of Heaven Chief Realm will completely fall. Hades' Era furrowed his brows and waved his hand, changing the topic. Heaven Chief Realm? This name sounds familiar, but what does it have to do with I? The spring of life is a peerless treasure. How can it be borrowed so easily? The female King Biluo clasped her hands behind her back as she said indifferently. I've said it before. If that little chef's imperial feast can satisfy me, I will naturally bring him into God-Vanishing Mountain. Whether he can get the spring of life will depend on his luck. If he can't satisfy me, then he will be chased out of Goddess City, the female King Biluo said. Wanting to obtain I's approval for the imperial feast is not as simple as that little chef thinks. Hades' Era leaned on the pillar, curling his lips. The so-called imperial feast is 70% celebration and 30% sacrifice. If he can obtain the approval of that woman in God-Vanishing Mountain, will you still stop him? You know so much. The female King Biluo glared at Hades' Era. In Goddess City, the way to give birth to the next generation was actually to rely on the spring of life. There were no men in Goddess City, but when the women of Goddess City reached a certain age, they would go to the sacrificial clan palace to receive a portion of the spring of life that was prepared with a secret recipe. After drinking the spring of life, the women of Goddess City would be able to bear a child for 10 months, giving birth to a newborn. And the newborns were basically all women. Like this, it was like a reincarnation cycle. It was unknown how long Goddess City had existed, but in this city, women had already become the leaders. Although the old Hades Tenzang had slept with the female King Biluo's mother, the female King Biluo was still born from the spring of life. She was not related to Hades' Era by blood. However, the brotherly love between them did not disappear. The two of them chatted for a long time in the main hall. The female King Biluo taught Hades' Era some of the ways and thoughts of being a ruler. Hades' Era also listened seriously. One was willing to teach, and the other was willing to listen. Time passed just like that. Goddess City, Imperial Palace Kitchen. It had been a day and a night. Chef Jing Yuan was still standing at the door. From time to time, she would turn her head to look inside. Seeing that there was no movement at all, she couldn't help but furrow her brows. She felt that it had been a long time. It shouldn't take that much time to memorize those recipes. Creak, all of a sudden, just as Jing Yuan's imagination was running wild, the tightly shut door finally opened. As soon as the door was opened, the noisy atmosphere in the kitchen blew over, making Bu Fong a little dazed. In the kitchen, many chefs were busy cooking and processing the ingredient. After all, this imperial palace's kitchen had to support the food of the entire goddess city. Bu Fong walked out, his face calm. Jing Yuan looked at Bu Fong, her eyes filled with hope. Have you finished reading the recipes? Have you memorized the cooking methods of the recipes? Asked Jing Yuan. I've memorized them. Bu Fong nodded. To Bu Fong, he could basically understand the 18 dishes with just a glance. The reason why he spent so much time inside was because he wanted to improve these dishes. Because in his eyes, the dishes in these recipes were full of flaws, including the 3 sacrificial dishes that Jing Yuan told him could not be changed in the slightest. Time is pressing. Should we start to prepare the ingredients now? Jing Yuan looked at Bu Fong, asking. After all, Bu Fong was the chef now, and she was just an assistant to help Bu Fong. In the previous imperial feast, she was the chef. She was used to giving orders, so it was a little troublesome to make changes in such a short time. Bu Fong clasped his hands, not answering Jing Yuan's question. This made Jing Yuan slightly furrow her brows. Bu Fong clasped his hands, pacing around the kitchen. Not long after, he circled the entire kitchen. He had a panoramic view of the entire kitchen and was very clear about it. He gently exhaled. Bu Fong looked at Jing Yuan. You go and prepare the ingredient. As for the others in the kitchen, chase them all out. Bu Fong said casually. His voice was not loud, but in that instant it resounded through the entire kitchen, making all the people who were busy in the kitchen stop what they were doing. Everyone turned to look at him, puzzled. The helpers in the kitchen were all women. Moreover, they were all middle-aged women. When they heard that Bu Fong wanted to chase them out, they were instantly displeased. Each of them stopped what they were doing, glaring at Bu Fong. Don't think that we won't dare to do anything to you just because you're a man. We, the helpers, cook in the kitchen every day. We're also the ones who prepare the imperial feast every year. What right do you have to chase us out? Even Her Majesty the Empress can't chase us out. You're a man. Who do you think you are? The imperial feast can't be completed without us. Those middle-aged women were very stubborn. They glared at Bu Fong, shouting in dissatisfaction. Jing Yuan's face was very unsightly. However, Bu Fong was very calm. He just looked indifferently at the group of women chattering non-stop. After a long time, Bu Fong opened his mouth. Are you done talking? If you're done, then leave. I'm the head chef of this imperial feast. My words count. Bu Fong raised his eyes slightly, looking at the group of people, his face expressionless. The group of women was instantly flustered, not knowing what to say. The so-called head chef was the chef in charge of a feast. He held the absolute right to speak in the kitchen. In the past, because of Jing Yuan's weak character, these women were used to it. However, this year, it was Bu Fong's turn. His domineering attitude made them speechless for a moment. Do you know what a head chef is? If you don't know, go back and understand before coming back to talk to me. Now I'll count to 3. Except for Jing Yuan, the rest of you leave the kitchen. Bu Fong said in a cold tone. 3. The expressions of the women below suddenly changed. They gritted their teeth. They were really unwilling to give up. They really didn't want to give up the qualification to be the assistant chefs of this imperial feast. After all, when the imperial feast was held, if they wanted to, they could really get a lot of benefits. In the past, when Jing Yuan was the head chef, she had a weak character, which encouraged their unscrupulous character. However, now that there was a new head chef, he actually wanted to drive them out of the kitchen without saying a word. How could they tolerate this? Bu Fang's eyes were indifferent, without the slightest emotion. Jing Yuan stood aside, not knowing what to do, rubbing her fists. Many people had started to walk out of the kitchen, but there were still people who were unwilling. Bu Fang spat out the last word. In the kitchen, almost all the people had left, leaving only 2 or 3 people who were unwilling, staring at Bu Fang. Looking at these 2 or 3 people who were unwilling, the corners of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. His mind flickered and the formation appeared. Xiao Bai's figure suddenly appeared behind him. After swallowing the lightning, Xiao Bai's aura seemed to become more condensed. Xiao Bai, these troublemakers. You know how to deal with them, right? Bu Fang said casually. With a swoosh, Xiao Bai's figure dashed out, the metal wings on his back spreading. The sound of lightning crackling resounded unceasingly. Light flashed in the mechanical eyes. Troublemakers will be stripped as an example to others. The mechanical voice rang out. The remaining 2 or 3 stubborn middle-aged women, who still wanted to get some benefits, were scared out of their wits, rolling and crawling out of the kitchen. Xiao Bai, guard the kitchen outside. No one is allowed to enter. Troublemakers, you know, Bu Fang said. A moment later, Bu Fang's eyes turned, falling on the anxious Jing Yuan. You go and find all the ingredients needed for the imperial feast. Within today, prepare all the ingredients. Bu Fang's words were calm, but it scared Jing Yuan. She hurried to turn around and leave. Jing Yuan had never seen such a domineering chef. It made her a little scared. Even though she was the head chef, she would talk and laugh with the assistant chefs when she cooked in the past. However, Bu Fang's behavior had completely subverted her view of the world. Looking at Jing Yuan turning around and leaving, Bu Fang twitched the corner of his mouth. Not everyone can be my assistant chef. At least, not a group of people with evil intentions. Jing Yuan's body stiffened and she was even more scared. Head Chef Bu was so scary. He was simply the legendary kitchen tyrant. Chapter 1136. Bu Fang didn't care what they called him. Moreover, in his opinion, kitchen tyrant wasn't a bad title to be called. As a chef, if he didn't have absolute control in the kitchen, how could he be called an excellent chef? As a head chef, if he was in charge of a group of helpers who didn't listen to orders and always thought about cutting corners, what would become of the kitchen? It would definitely be a mess. During Bu Fang's inspection, Bu Fang found that at least half of the helpers had cut corners in the process of processing ingredients. In other words, they were lazy and skipped a lot of steps. Because this group of people often cooked in the kitchen, they were used to processing ingredients. This kind of processing always inadvertently skipped some step. For example, some ingredients needed to be peeled. These helpers did peel them, but there were still some residue left in the peel. Moreover, after peeling, they didn't wash it carefully. Others might not notice this process, or they might think that it wasn't a big deal. However, for Bu Fang, these steps couldn't be skipped. As he always strived for perfection, he was very strict with his culinary skills. You could choose not to do it, but if you cut corners, you couldn't do it. Jing Yuan had a good temper, so these people were unscrupulous. Bu Fang didn't have a good temper. When cooking, his temper was really bad. It was fine if he cooked alone, but if there was a helper, any mistake made by the helper would be reflected in his eyes. Looking at Jing Yuan's back as she left, Bu Fang's face didn't change a bit. For Bu Fang, cooking was a kind of art. When it came to art, he always needed to strive for perfection. Bu Fang pulled a chair and sat down. His brows slightly furrowed. In his mind, the 3 sacrificial dishes recipes that he had seen in that room appeared. Jing Yuan had told him that the sacrificial dishes couldn't be changed. However, in Bu Fang's eyes, although these 3 dishes looked perfect, they still had flaws. If he could fix and fill in those flaws, the texture and taste of these 3 dishes would be even better. The 3 dishes of the sacrificial ceremony had very pleasant names. Spring Wind, Summer Wound, Autumn Astringency. Who came up with the names of these 3 dishes? It was indeed quite interesting. Bufang stroked his chin. Just from the names of these 3 dishes, Bufang could sense a faint sadness. Of course, this might just be Bufang's own feelings. Bufang didn't move. He just sat on the chair and brewed his emotions. There were about 5 days left. Within these 5 days, he had to find and process all the ingredients required for the dish. Furthermore, the 3 dishes needed for the ritual had to be cooked in advance. There were many requirements and time was tight. Time flew by quickly. In the imperial palace, the news about Bufang spread like wildfire. The news that Bufang had chased all the assistant chefs out of the kitchen quickly spread throughout the imperial palace and even Goddess City. Many people learned of this news, and everyone's expression became a little strange and playful. He had chased all the assistant chefs out of the kitchen. What did that man want to do? 18 dishes. Did he want to cook them alone? Oh, he had also asked Chef Jing Yuan to help him. However, even with Chef Jing Yuan, there were only 2 of them. 2 people wanted to cook all the dishes of the imperial feast. It wasn't easy at all. And the chefs who were chased out of the kitchen by Bufang started to mock and ridicule Bufang. Their disdainful words echoed unceasingly. For a moment, the entire imperial palace didn't have a good impression of the imperial feast. When the female King Biluo got the news, half a day had passed. He really chased all the assistant chefs out of the kitchen? Hearing the maid's words, the female King Biluo's face revealed a playful expression. Interesting. I'm suddenly looking forward to the imperial feast. The female King Biluo's red lips parted, revealing her pearl-white teeth. The maid was puzzled. Your Majesty, do you think that man can cook all the dishes of the imperial feast alone? If he didn't chase those assistant chefs out, I wouldn't have such high expectations, the queen said. The maidservant was confused. How could I not know what kind of people they are? In the past, I didn't have much expectations for the imperial feast. I just muddled through it. But this year, there might be some changes. If nothing changes, it would be a waste of expectations. The female King Biluo lazily leaned against the spirit gold throne, her beautiful figure instantly forming a perfect arc. Half a day later, only then did Jing Yuan hurriedly rush back from the distance. From afar, she saw Xiao Bai standing at the door. Instantly, she felt a little uneasy. The aura that Xiao Bai had released made her a little afraid. However, she still plucked up her courage and pushed open the kitchen door, entering. In the kitchen, Bufang sat on the chair, pondering. In his mind, he was constantly simulating the cooking process. All of a sudden, his eyes moved, looking into the distance. There, Jing Yuan had returned. Jing Yuan closed the kitchen door, walking toward Bufang. Seeing Bufang, she didn't say anything. With a wave of her hand, a big pile of ingredients appeared in the cooking material area. Here are 2 portions of the imperial feast's ingredients, so head chef Bu has 2 chances. If you fail once, you can try again. Many of the ingredients are precious, so I can only collect 2 portions in a short time. Jing Yuan looked at Bufang, saying. Bufang stood up, clasping his hands as he walked to the cooking material area. He rummaged through the ingredients, observing them for a while. Then, he turned to look at Jing Yuan, saying, Go find some green jade fruit and purple cloud grass. Huh? Green jade fruit and purple cloud grass? Jing Yuan was a little surprised, as though she didn't understand. Among the 18 imperial feast dishes, there doesn't seem to be any dish that needs these ingredients. Jing Yuan furrowed her brows as she said. All of a sudden, as soon as she finished speaking, her body stiffened. Because when she raised her head, her eyes met Bufang's indifferent gaze. I'll go now. Thinking about how Bufang had chased away all the chefs because of a disagreement, Jing Yuan's small face became deathly pale. This was the kitchen tyrant, and she actually questioned his actions. A wave of fear suddenly welled up in her heart. Jing Yuan turned around and ran away, disappearing in a short while. The corners of Bu Fang's mouth instantly twitched. This woman. Is she stupid or what? After Jing Yuan left, Bu Fang's gaze fell on the ingredients, gently exhaling. Rolling up the sleeves of the vermilion robe, Bu Fang began to prepare the ingredients. Of course, what he needed to do now were the ingredients for the 3 sacrificial dishes. Buzz, a flash of saber light flashed past. Bu Fang's eyes instantly became sharp. A curtain of stars appeared and a meteor fell. In the next instant, a blade light shot out. Those ingredients all soared up into the sky. Under the impact of the blade light, their shapes constantly changed. Skin flew everywhere and the stalks fell. Shredding, cutting, slicing. Everything was done perfectly. After cutting the ingredients, Bu Fang began to wash them. The water in Goddess City was a kind of clear water with dense spirit energy. It wasn't any worse than Bu Fang's heavenly mountain spirit spring water. Thus, Bu Fang didn't change to another water, directly washing them. Swish. In the huge kitchen, only the sound of Bu Fang washing the ingredients could be heard. After a long time, Jing Yuan hurried back. The 2 ingredients that Bu Fang had mentioned were really rare. She had searched through the ingredient warehouse to find them. When she pushed open the door and entered the kitchen, she saw the freshly processed ingredients on the blue and white porcelain plates with sparkling water droplets dripping from them. Jing Yuan was slightly stunned on the spot. How long had it been? Bu Fang had already prepared all the ingredients needed to cook the sacrificial dishes? Why are you standing there like a fool? Give me the ingredient. Then, you go and prepare the other ingredient. Remember, you can't be careless when handling the ingredient, Bu Fang said. Jing Yuan came back to her senses, hurriedly handing the 2 ingredients to Bu Fang. The green jade fruit was a green fruit. After Bu Fang received it, he used the dragon bone kitchen knife to cut it into 2 halves. Taking out the 2 halves of the fruit, he grabbed it with one hand and squeezed it. The green juice was squeezed out, dripping it into a blue and white porcelain bowl. As for the purple cloud grass, Bu Fang opened his mouth and spat out a ball of white flame, burning the purple cloud grass. The purple cloud grass turned into a ball of purple liquid. The liquid of the purple cloud grass was also poured into a blue and white porcelain bowl. The ingredients for the 3 sacrificial dishes were all prepared. The green jade fruit and the purple cloud grass don't seem to be the ingredients needed for the sacrificial dishes, right? Jing Yuan looked at Bu Fang as she processed the ingredient. Bu Fang didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked at Jing Yuan. Just watch first. You'll know later, Bu Fang said. In the next instant, the white tiger stove floated, and the black turtle constellation wok was placed on it. A ball of white flame shot out, drilling into the stove, burning fiercely. The scorching temperature suddenly burst out. Bu Fang used a velvet rope to tie his hair, starting to cook. The ladle spun in Bu Fang's hand. Bu Fang's mental energy, which was as vast as the sea, swept out, and the vermilion robe fluttered. Jing Yuan, who was watching from afar, was a little stunned. Bu Fang's movements were as smooth as flowing water, dazzling people. One of the 3 sacrificial dishes, spring breeze. This was a vegetable dish. According to the records in the recipe, this dish was cooked with a mixture of 32 types of spirit medicines and immortal ingredients. One of them was unique, and they couldn't be mixed together. When one ate it, there were 32 different tastes, and it was an extremely great test of the chef's control. It seemed to symbolize the revival of all things in the spring breeze, the feeling of hundreds of flowers blooming. This was the meaning of the so-called spring breeze. Boom! Boom! The flame soared to the sky. The scarlet flame in the black turtle constellation wok shot up to the sky. The ingredients were put into the wok. As the wok was flipped and stir-fried, each of them shot up to the sky. The oil splashed, moving brilliantly. Gently shaking the wok, all the ingredients fell into the ladle, scooped them out, and placed them on a porcelain plate. Under the control of his mental energy, the arrangement of the ingredients was very exquisite. The hot oil boiled, pouring down, and the sizzling sound echoed unceasingly. As a result, the dish seemed to burst out a dazzling light. Boom! Boom! Above the sky, thunderclouds rolled over. The lightning punishment was coming. Of course, to Bufang, the so-called lightning punishment had been handled by Xiao Bai. This time, Little White should be able to eat its fill. Jing Yuan watched as if she was intoxicated. Bufang's cooking allowed her to learn a lot just by watching. Among them was the control of the heat and the degree of cooking ingredients' maturity. She was shocked by the beauty of the heavens. In the past, she could only vaguely control these things. However, Bufang's cooking was precise to the extreme. To reach this level, he needed to cultivate. She was still far from it. All of a sudden, Jing Yuan's eyes changed. She suddenly realized that Bufang had actually poured the juice of the green jade fruit into the pot and was planning to pour it over the dish that was already laid out on the plate. This behavior was not recorded in the recipe. Instantly, her face changed. Head Chef Bu. No. The sacrificial dish cannot be changed. Jing Yuan subconsciously opened her mouth to call out. However, Bufang just glanced at her indifferently. His hands didn't stop moving. The dark green liquid splashed out. Chapter 1137. Jing Yuan's face turned unsightly. She had said more than once that the sacrificial dish must be cooked according to the recipe, and there must not be any changes. Even during the cooking process, there must not be any mistakes, because once there were any mistakes, it could easily change the taste of the dish. But head chef Bu, he actually directly added new ingredients and made changes to the recipe. This was a very bold move. Jing Yuan hurriedly stopped what she was doing, shaking off the water stains on her hands as she walked over. A rich aroma permeated the air. The dish, which was emitting a dark green radiance, blinded her eyes for a moment. It was a very beautiful dish. Jing Yuan had to admit that, at least, if the recipe had not been changed, the dish would definitely not be like this. For a moment, Jing Yuan was somewhat speechless. Bufang looked at Jing Yuan, and the corners of his mouth slightly rose. He reached out his hand, gently patting Jing Yuan's head. This made the latter freeze on the spot. As an assistant chef, the most important thing is to believe in the head chef. Bufang looked at Jing Yuan, saying. She felt a gentle tap on her head. Jing Yuan's face instantly turned red. Even she did not know why her face became so red at this moment. Jing Yuan opened her mouth, but she did not know what to say. Okay, you go back and continue processing the ingredients. I know what you want to say, but you don't have to worry. Since I dared to change the recipe, I naturally have confidence, said Bufang. Jing Yuan blushed. At this moment, she did not know anything. She walked back to her seat in a daze, picked up the kitchen knife, and continued processing the ingredient. After a long time, she came to her senses, looking at Bufang. The sacrificial dish was directly offered to the high priestess of the sacrificial sect palace. She could not afford to make any mistakes. It should be known that before Jing Yuan, there was once a head chef in charge of the imperial feast, and he arbitrarily changed the recipe of the sacrificial dish. During the imperial feast, he was discovered by the high priestess and killed on the spot. From then on, no one dared to make any changes to the sacrificial dishes. However, head chef Bu Jing Yuan's face was a little conflicted, but looking at Bufang's confident look, Jing Yuan also felt a little helpless. I'll secretly cook another portion tonight. If head chef Bu's portion doesn't work, my portion can still save the day. At least head chef Bu won't end up like the previous chef. As she thought about it, Jing Yuan calmed herself down and continued to cook. Rumble! Above the vault of heaven, dark clouds swept over and shrouded the entire palace. In the palace, Yu raised her head and looked at the dark sky. She couldn't help but murmur, "Bufang has begun to cook. This is the manifestation of the will of the Great Path. This little chef's dish is really not ordinary. It can actually be sensed by the will of the Great Path in Goddess City." The female King Biluo supported her chin with one hand, looking at the pitch-black vault of heaven as she couldn't help but say. Hades' Era sat in the distance, holding a spicy strip in his mouth as he crossed his legs. "Bufang young man's cooking skills are beyond your imagination," Hades' Era said proudly. Yu agreed with Bufang's words, constantly nodding her head. From this night onwards, the black thunderclouds above Goddess City continued to appear. The rumbling sounds resounded unceasingly, accompanied by the peals of thunder. Everyone in Goddess City was anxious and fearful. Everyone looked in the direction of the imperial palace in awe. On the day of the imperial feast, such a strange phenomenon actually appeared. It was enough to make everyone in Goddess City tremble. 5 days passed quickly. When the last lightning bolt fell after it was blocked by Xiao Bai, whose body was covered in flashing lightning arcs, the thunderclouds finally dispersed. After blocking the thunderclouds, Xiao Bai sat on the ground. Every part of his body was covered in lightning arcs. His mechanical eyes twinkled, as though he was digesting it. After digesting these lightning punishments, Xiao Bai's power would definitely increase tremendously. Of course, digesting these lightning punishments required time. On this day, Goddess City, sacrificial sect palace with a squeak, the window was pushed open, and a wooden frame was placed against the corner of the window. The high priestess wore a white robe, clasping her hands as she stood in front of the window. Her eyes were deep as she looked at the disappearing black clouds. In the room, light blue smoke rose from the incense burner, constantly drifting. The back of the white robe was very long, spreading out in the room like a flower bud that was about to bloom. Is it over? The day of the imperial feast is finally here. The day of the prophecy is getting closer and closer. The high priestess mumbled softly. Her voice was so soft that only she could hear it. Outside, someone knocked on the door. The high priestess turned around. The door was pushed open. Wei Jin was wearing a military uniform, standing at the door with a solemn expression. Her face was painted with exquisite makeup, which made her look even more solemn. "High Priestess, His Majesty asked this humble servant to invite the High Priestess to the palace to enjoy the imperial feast together," Wei Jin said respectfully. She raised her hands, clasping them together as she slightly bowed. The High Priestess walked forward, quickly arriving in front of the incense burner, sitting cross-legged. "Got it," the High Priestess calmly replied. Then, she waved her hand and a makeup box appeared. She opened it, took out a wooden comb, and began to dress herself up. The High Priestess, who usually did not wear any makeup, had to put on exquisite makeup when she attended an event. It was unknown when 2 maids had appeared in the room. The maids were holding beautiful clothes and silver jewelry, kneeling beside the High Priestess. The High Priestess' movements were slow and gentle. She gently raised her eyebrow pencil, decorating her immortal-like face. Along with the makeup, her coldness had a trace of nobility and charm. Swish, after the makeup was done, the maids carefully put silver jewelry on the High Priestess. Her black hair was coiled up, and the jewelry decorated it, accentuating her noble temperament. The High Priestess stood up, spreading her arms. Instantly, her white robe slid down from her body. Her skin, which was as soft as milk, slowly emerged from the slipping clothes. The 2 maids took small steps, pulling open the embroidered clothes and putting them on the High Priestess. She tied them with a belt and put on jewelry. Outside the door, Wei Jin still maintained her respectful posture. When the High Priestess finished dressing up and slowly walked out of the room, she took a step back, following behind the High Priestess. In Goddess City, if Her Majesty the Empress had the highest status, then the High Priestess was right below her. Although Wei Jin was the great general of the guards, She did not dare to neglect the high priestess. Ring, ring. A light sound rang out. 2 maids carried a scepter with 9 golden rings, coming to the high priestess' side, handing it to her. The high priestess grabbed the scepter, her eyes instantly becoming cold and aloof. Let's go to the imperial palace, the high priestess said. Wei Jin and her subordinates all replied, yes. The imperial palace's gates opened wide. Streams of people surged, coming and going in an endless stream. The high-ranking officials of Goddess City, as well as many soldiers, were all rushing to the imperial palace. And Goddess City was also brightly lit, with smoke lingering in the air. On the streets, little girls were playing and young girls were laughing. It was extremely lively. The day of the imperial feast was a day of celebration in Goddess City. In front of the imperial palace, many high-ranking officials were wearing luxurious clothes. After meeting each other, they cupped their hands and greeted each other, congratulating each other and wishing each other well. The maids appeared in groups, lining up to welcome the high-ranking officials. Dami Hayashi was wearing a green armor, laughing loudly as she came from outside the hall. Her wheat-colored skin made her look full of heroic spirit. Chi Si's red cloak fluttered, and her scarlet armor was burning like a raging flame. The green dragon spread its wings, the scarlet dragon roared, and the black dragon emitted an astonishing pressure. There was also a woman riding a winged tiger beast. This was one of the 5 great armies of Goddess City, the great general of the beast army. She was in charge of the hundreds of beasts in Goddess City. All the high-ranking officials arrived and entered the imperial palace. The spacious imperial palace had already been decorated. In the center of the imperial palace, there was a spirit gold dining table. The dining table was round, and in the center was a round plate. The sides and legs of the dining table were carved with gorgeous patterns. Around the dining table, there were a total of 15 chairs. They represented the 15 people with high positions in Goddess City. On both sides of the huge dining table, there were many small dining tables. Each small dining table corresponded to a position. On the throne at the highest point of the imperial palace, the female King Biluo was also dressed splendidly. Her makeup was exquisite, and she was so beautiful that it made people stunned. Her red lips were like raging flames, burning like fire. She sat high up, looking down. Yu and Hades' Era were not far away, sitting close to each other at the small dining table. Hades' Era, with a spicy strip in his mouth, looked at Yu and said, "When my dad entered Goddess City, he seemed to have also participated in this imperial feast. After so many years, I was fortunate enough to participate in this imperial feast. TSK, don't you think this is fate?" Yu glanced at Hades' Era. If you didn't dress as a woman and enter Goddess City, do you think you could participate in the imperial feast? Hades' Era glared at her. "You little girl, even if I swaggered in, I could still participate in the imperial feast." Yu glanced at him and sneered. That look made Hades' Era so angry that he almost jumped up and wanted to argue with Yu. However, as the sound of the harp resounded, outside the imperial palace, flower petals fluttered. A large group of people slowly arrived. The sound of the golden rings colliding, the sound of the harp, and the female chanting resounded endlessly. Outside the palace, the high priestess had a solemn expression as she arrived barefooted. Every official stood up, solemnly looking at the high priestess. Everyone in Goddess City had to be respectful towards the high priestess of the worship sect. This was because the high priestess was the only existence in Goddess City that could communicate with the peerless existence in the God-vanishing mountain. Even the Empress could not do so. The Empress controlled the authority to enter and exit the God-vanishing mountain, while the High Priestess was in charge of contacting the peerless expert in the God-vanishing mountain. Towards this, everyone had respect in their hearts. It was said that the High Priestess and the Empress were blood sisters. The female King Biluo stood up from her seat, looking at the High Priestess who was leisurely walking over. Her face instantly became solemn. She walked down from the throne, slowly approaching the high priestess. After a brief greeting, she brought the high priestess to sit. Sitting on the huge spirit gold dining table, the high priestess sat on her left. The high priestess sat on her left. Chi-Si, Lin Damei, He Mu, Wei Jin, and the other generals all took their seats. The other officials also took their seat. Very quickly, the 15 seats were all filled. On the dining table, the atmosphere was stagnant. The high priestess was cold and arrogant, while the empress was noble and noble. Everyone looked at the two of them, their gazes revealing a respectful expression. And at the small dining table at the side, the other officials also took their seat. The high priestess stood up, stretching out her white palm. Her fingers constantly formed seals, and very quickly, a strange array was formed. That array shot out, landing in the middle of the spirit gold dining table. Standing at the entrance of the palace, a maid dressed in luxurious clothes instantly bowed, her voice resounding throughout the entire palace. Goddess City's imperial feast begins. Her voice fell. At the side of the palace, the doors opened, and maids carrying dishes came out one after another. Each of the dishes carried by the maids were placed on blue and white porcelain plates, covered with silver round lids. Jing Yuan was dressed splendidly, with exquisite makeup on her face, looking quite beautiful. Her hands were placed together, above her navel, as she walked out with the maids serving the dishes. Dishes were placed on the spirit gold dining table one after another. Meeting the gazes of the 15 people at the spirit gold dining table, even Jing Yuan, who had hosted several imperial feast sessions, felt her heart tighten. The first item of the imperial feast, 9 appetizers, open. Appetizers? Everyone was stunned. Since when did the imperial feast have an appetizer? Just as everyone was puzzled. One by one, the maids rolled up their sleeves, revealing their white wrists. Their delicate hands pressed on the silver round lids, gently opening the lids. Everyone's gazes, which were already filled with anticipation, landed. Beams of light shot out from those dishes. The light shot into the sky, and the fragrance filled the air. Chapter 1138. 9 appetizers? When Jing Yuan shouted those words, the entire audience was stunned. In the past, the imperial feast would start with dishes being served one by one according to the menu. There was no such thing as an appetizer. More importantly, what was the so-called appetizer? Many people thought about it and they understood. This appetizer should be the main chef of the imperial feast. He wanted to stimulate their appetites so that they could focus their attention on the dish. However, this led to an uncertain factor, and that was, the appetizer had to be able to stimulate everyone's appetite. Otherwise, it would backfire, which would make people unhappy. The maids stretched out their delicate hands, their other hands holding onto their sleeve. Under Jing Yuan's order, they lifted the lid. Beams of light shot out from within, attracting everyone's attention. The first appetizer, spirit pickled radish. The maid unveiled the first dish. The sound of a harp echoed. Everyone's gazes landed on it. Even the cold and arrogant high priestess and the noble female King Biluo couldn't help but look at the first dish. As the first dish, it had to be stunning. And what would Bu Fong choose as an appetizer? Everyone was curious. In the distance, Hades' Era held a spicy strip in his mouth. He craned his head, his eyes curious. Yu was the same. She also wanted to know what Bu Fong would choose as his first appetizer. However, as soon as the lid was lifted, a unique aroma spread out. Spirit pickled radish? Everyone was bewildered. Then, a wave of aroma spread out, surging over them. Everyone's face changed. They took a deep breath. With just a sniff, the sour smell drilled into their nostrils, stirring their taste buds and causing their mouths to involuntarily secrete saliva. A plate of radish? Is it really just a plate of radish? A white radish? That's a dish? Are you kidding me? On the spirit gold dining table, everyone had a stupefied expression. They never imagined that the first dish would actually be a plate of white radish. Jing Yuan took in everyone's expressions. Seeing that everyone was so surprised, she felt relieved. As for doubts about this dish, a playful smile appeared on Jing Yuan's face. The concept of an appetizer was added by head chef Bu. Back then, she had also doubted it. Since it was the imperial feast, it was only natural that the 18 main dishes of the imperial feast would be served first. However, head chef Bu actually proposed such a concept. Most importantly, the first dish was actually a plate of radishes. This made Jing Yuan even more doubtful. However, under Bu Fang's playful expression, she ate a piece of carrot. Then, she gave in. This is spirit sour radish, an appetizer from head chef Bu's collection. The quantity is limited, so eat it and cherish it. Jing Yuan didn't explain too much and left a lot of suspense. Everyone at the spirit gold dining table looked at each other. Who cared if it was spirit sour radish or spirit spicy radish? Wasn't it still a radish? Such a grand imperial feast, and the first dish was a plate of radish. Was this right? The female King Biluo didn't say anything. Actually, contrary to the doubts of others, she had an estimate of Bu Fang's cooking. Since he dared to take out a plate of radish as the first dish, naturally, he had his reasons. Thus, the female King Biluo grabbed a pair of chopsticks. Those were silver chopsticks, different from other chopsticks. The tip of the queen's chopsticks was carved with an exquisite phoenix sculpture. She picked up a piece of radish. The radish was crystal clear. There was also a transparent juice flowing on it. The radish was cut into shreds by Bu Fang, and each shred was the same size. A unique sour smell permeated the radish. This sour smell didn't make people burp, but left a deep impression. Picking up the radish, under everyone's gazes, the queen opened her fiery red lips, revealing her pearly white teeth as she took a bite of the radish. The sweet and sour taste instantly spread in her mouth. That taste wasn't very strong, but it instantly stimulated the taste buds, causing the queen's brows to involuntarily furrow. This taste, crunch, crunch, after the queen furrowed her brows, her eyes suddenly lit up. This sweet and sour taste was unexpectedly good. Stuffing the whole radish into her mouth, she chewed. Then, she reached out with her chopsticks to pick up the second one. Delicious! The queen exclaimed. It was just a radish. How delicious could it be? Everyone was suspicious. However, after everyone picked up a radish and put it into their mouth, they became silent. That taste stimulated their taste buds, and even the tip of their noses couldn't help but have some sweat trickle down. It was so sour that their whole bodies trembled, so King delicious. Jing Yuan lightly laughed, then continued, the second appetizer, sour and spicy diced lotus root. Everyone's gaze turned, landing on the second appetizer that had just been opened. Another round of rotation and the chopsticks were extended. The third appetizer, crystal phoenix claw. The fourth appetizer, abyssal chili strip. Jing Yuan announced the names of the dishes one by one. The 15 people on the table ate every dish, and they simply couldn't stop eating. Not only was the appetizer radish so delicious, but the other dishes that followed also made them exclaim in admiration. Whether it was the crystal phoenix claw or the abyssal chili strip, they were like cat claws, scratching their hearts, making them unable to free themselves. Abyssal chili strip? Hades' era held the chili strip in his mouth, his face filled with confusion and disbelief. Bu Fang, that young man, actually used his favorite chili strip as an appetizer? There was such a thing? The female King Biluo was also very surprised. She glanced at Hades' era, who was in the distance, and saw the chili strip in his mouth, and her heart was filled with curiosity. This thing could really be eaten. The chili strip was cut into small pieces by Bu Fang, and it was placed on the plate, emitting a dazzling radiance. The chili strip could be said to be the most fragrant among the appetizers, and they couldn't help but want to reach out their chopstick. The female King Biluo picked up a chili strip. Her red lips pouted, and she stuffed the chili strip into her mouth, sucking it. Her tongue wrapped around the chili strip. The spicy taste of the chili strip instantly spread out. Huh! The Empress' eyes widened. This spicy taste. This texture. This taste seemed to penetrate deep into the bone. This was the chili strip. It was really too delicious. The Empress raised her head, chewing the chili strip in her mouth. Her red lips became even redder, and a trace of red appeared on her face. Her beautiful face showed a hint of intoxication. The Empress' appearance scared the people around her, and the High Priestess was even more puzzled. It was just a chili strip. Why did she look like she had taken drugs? Then, the others began to eat. Then, all 15 people at the table raised their heads, revealing an intoxicated expression in the distance. Hades' era hugged the spirit gold pillar, as if there was nothing left to live for. His head constantly knocked on the pillar, making banging noises. Eyes chili strip. This group of barbaric women, how can they eat chili strips like this? How can the steps of eating chili strips be like this? 1 suck, 2 suck, 3 suck, 4 suck. Suck, 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 suck. In and out, this is the correct way to eat chili strips. Hades' era's heart was dripping blood, and tears were flowing. The corner of Yu's mouth twitched. Bufang's chili strips were indeed very attractive. Back then, she had also been crazy for a while, but one time she ate too much. She was afraid of seeing chili strips, and from then on she stopped eating chili strip. However, she still had to admit that Bufang's chili strips were definitely filled with a fatal attraction. The 9 appetizers were all uncovered. Under the dumbfounded gazes of the surrounding people, the 15 people at the spirit gold dining table finished all the appetizers. The maids all sucked in a breath of cold air. It was the first time they saw adults eat so much. However, on the contrary, after finishing all 9 appetizers, they did not feel full at all. Instead, their stomachs were rumbling, and they could not wait to continue eating. Even the cold and arrogant High Priestess, at this moment, was full of interest for the next dish. The corner of Chef Jing Yuan's mouth rose. Head Chef Bu's appetizers were effective. Cheering in her heart, Jing Yuan turned and entered the kitchen. After a while, she personally carried a dish, walking over from afar. The first dish of the imperial feast, jadeite taro spirit fruit. Jing Yuan's pleasant voice carried a trace of excitement, resounding throughout the entire hall. She took small steps, arriving in front of the spirit gold table, placing the blue and white porcelain plate on the table. The plates of appetizers on the table that had been eaten had already been removed by the maid. And on both sides of the independent seats, the appetizers began to be served. The order of dishes on both sides was staggered. Jadeite taro spirit fruit? This dish stunned everyone. This time, it should be the official dish of the imperial feast, right? Although the appetizer was not bad, it was still the 18 dishes that tested the head chef. And the first dish that Chef Jing Yuan read out was something that they had no impression of in the previous imperial feast. Chef Jing Yuan did not point it out. She grabbed the silver cover, suddenly opening it. Instantly, hot air surged up. A wave of dazzling golden light instantly shot out, filling everyone's eyes. When everyone saw the appearance of the dish clearly, they were in an uproar. That was because they were stunned. Even the female King Biluo's red lips were slightly parted, feeling a little incredulous. This was a dish that was full of three-dimensional feeling. The dish was steaming hot, and golden sugar threads were drawn in the air, forming a phoenix that seemed to be about to spread its wings and soar into the sky. In that phoenix's abdomen there were pink spirit fruits floating inside. Under the light, this dish radiated a dazzling radiance. Seeing this dish, many people came to a sudden realization. They had eaten this dish before, but at that time, it didn't look like this. The sugar threads were round, wrapping the taro spirit fruit inside. It didn't give people a feeling of being stunned. The female King Biluo couldn't wait anymore. Women were born to love beauty. Such a beautiful dish made them inexplicably happy and excited. She reached out her silver chopsticks. Instantly, the floating taro spirit fruit was caught by the queen. Then, she pulled it out. As soon as she pulled it out, it instantly caused an uproar. Everyone took in a breath of cold air. Because as the queen pulled it out, the taro spirit fruit actually had silk threads following it. It was as if she was pulling out fine silk threads. And as she pulled it out, the phoenix wings drawn by the sugar threads flapped, as if it was about to dance. Stunning. It was completely breathtaking. The female King Bilua's heart was filled with joy. A dish actually gave her such joy. It was really rare. Putting the dish into the bowl, the queen gently licked the taro spirit fruit. The taro spirit fruit wrapped in the sugar was incomparably sweet. It was as if there was an arrow shooting into the queen's heart. It made her face involuntarily blush. She softly let out a sigh. Her pearly white teeth opened, then bit down. Within the soft and tender texture, there was a kind of taro spirit fruit's soft and tender texture. The sweet, fragrant, and tender taste blended into one, bursting out at the same time. The queen chewed, sticking out her tongue to lick her red lip. Her joy was overflowing. The others had already seen it. This dish could actually have so many tricks. Chef Jing Yuan was also stunned. She didn't think that after head chef Bu's modification, the dish would be so earth-shattering. It made her salivate, wanting to take a bite. The high priestess looked at the queen. Without saying a word, she spun the spirit gold wheel. She reached out her chopsticks, picking up a piece of taro spirit fruit. Her pearly white teeth gently opened, biting down. Even someone as cold and arrogant as the high priestess couldn't help but let out a light hum. After that, the remaining 13 people at the table almost went crazy. The eyes of Qi Si and the others flashed. Many people in the surroundings were dumbfounded. This imperial feast seemed to be very different from the previous years. It made people full of anticipation. However, only Jing Yuan's face showed a hint of worry in her joy. She glanced at the high priestess, who was happily eating. Thinking about the sacrificial dish that head chef Bu had modified, her heart suddenly felt a little anxious. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.